The dying sun painted the Arizona sky in shades of crimson and gold, casting long shadows across the burning village. Smoke rose in thick black columns merging with the darkening heavens, as if the very souls of the dead were ascending. Amid this apocalyptic scene stood a small Apache girl, no more than 10 years old, her obsidian eyes reflecting the flames that consumed everything she had ever known. Naya Redfeather stood frozen, unable to scream, unable to cry. The world had ended, yet somehow she remained. In the distance, a company of soldiers retreated, the American flag rippling in the wind above them like a banner of conquest. Blood stained the girl's deerskin dress, though none of it was her own. It belonged to her mother, who had hidden her in a sacred cave moments before the soldiers arrived. Through the haze of smoke and death, Naya saw a white man kneeling beside a body. Even from this distance, she recognized her father, Chief Rising Sun. The white man, a soldier with lieutenant insignia, held her father's hand, his shoulders shaking in what appeared to be grief. This made no sense to Naya. Why would one who brought death mourn its coming? The soldier looked up as if sensing her presence, and their eyes met across the burning ruins. He was younger than the others, with kind eyes that seemed out of place in this hell. Rising slowly, he walked toward her, and Naya found herself unable to run. When he reached her, he knelt to meet her gaze. Tears had carved clean lines through the soot and dirt on his face. In broken Apache, he spoke words that would echo through the next decade of her life. Nidiwa, you will live. This is my promise. The screen of memory faded to black, the words hanging in the void, before being replaced by two simple words. 10 years later. Pain had become Naya's entire world. The rough bark of the pine tree dug into her back as she balanced on the tips of her toes, fighting for each breath. Her arms, stretched wide and bound to a thick branch above, had long since lost all feeling. The rope around her neck tightened whenever her strength faltered, forcing her to push upward with trembling legs or accept strangulation. Blood ran down her wrists, where the ropes had worn her skin raw. It mixed with sweat and dirt, creating muddy rivulets that traced the contours of her arms before dripping onto the forest floor below. Each drop contained a small piece of her life force, slowly draining away as the hours passed. Below her, sitting casually on a fallen log, Colonel Edmund Blackwood sipped whiskey from a silver flask. At 45, he cut an imposing figure in his tailored suit, his military bearing evident despite his civilian clothes. His salt-and-pepper hair was neatly combed, and his clean-shaven face might have been handsome if not for the coldness in his eyes. He watched her struggle with the detached interest of a scientist observing an experiment. "Your tolerance for pain is impressive, Naya," he remarked, his voice cultured and calm. "Most would have begged for death by now." Naya said I'd nothing. She would not give him the satisfaction of hearing her plead. Instead, she fixed her gaze on the darkening sky above, where the first stars were beginning to appear. If these were to be her last moments, she would spend them looking at the heavens, not at the devil before her. Blackwood rose from his seat, approaching with measured steps. He reached up, tracing a finger along the rope that cut into her neck. The contact made her flinch, her breathing growing more labored. "You know what I want," he said, his breath hot against her ear. "Tell me, and this ends quickly. Continue your silence, and we have all night. Perhaps longer." Naya turned her head slightly, meeting his gaze with defiance burning in her eyes. Her voice, when it came, was raspy, but unwavering. "You already killed my family for it. Why stop now?" A flicker of annoyance crossed Blackwood's face. He stepped back, gesturing expansively. "This isn't simply about killing you, Naya. though I admit watching your father die did bring a certain professional satisfaction." He paused, watching her reaction. "No, this is about the sacred fire. Your father said something before he died, that gold is not merely gold. I want to know what that means." From his pocket, Blackwood produced a worn piece of animal hide, carefully unfolding it to reveal an incomplete map, with strange symbols etched into it. Ancient Apache markings formed a constellation of directions, but a crucial section was missing. "Half a map leads nowhere," he said, carefully refolding the hide. "I know the rest was carved into your skin. Where is it now, Naya? What did you do with the piece that was cut from your shoulder?" Involuntarily, Naya's eyes flicked to her right shoulder, where a jagged scar disrupted the smooth brown skin. Blackwood smiled, noticing the reaction. "Yes, I know about that too. Did you think your secrets would stay buried forever?" He returned to his log, taking another sip from his flask. "The Apache believe the sacred fire is a spiritual legacy. The army thinks it's a gold mine. I believe it's something far more valuable than either." His eyes gleamed with cold ambition. "And I will have it, with or without your cooperation." Night descended fully upon the forest, wrapping them in a blanket of darkness, broken only by Blackwood's small campfire. The colonel eventually dozed off his head, lolling against a tree trunk, the empty flask fallen from his loose grip. Naya's body screamed with agony, but her mind remained clear. She used the pain to keep herself awake, knowing that sleep meant death. In the quiet of the night, with only the distant call of an owl and the crackling of dying embers for company, she began to pray silently in Apache. She called to her ancestors, to the spirits of her parents, asking for strength to endure until morning. The moon rose high, bathing the forest in silver light. As Naya's prayer continued, a movement at the edge of the clearing caught her attention. A white wolf stood watching her, its fur luminous in the moonlight, its eyes reflecting an intelligence that seemed almost supernatural. In Apache tradition, the white wolf was a sacred messenger, a guide between worlds. Naya's heart quickened. Was this a sign that her journey in this world was ending, or was it something else, a promise of survival? The wolf held her gaze for a long moment before disappearing back into the darkness. But its presence had rekindled something within her. Her father's words came back to her, spoken in the sacred cave where he had shown her the map that would eventually be tattooed partially onto her skin. "The sacred fire is not gold that glitters, my daughter. It is the eternal flame of our people's spirit. It must never fall into hands that would use it for destruction." With renewed determination, Naya forced her aching legs to support her weight. She would not die tonight. Not like this. Not before ensuring the sacred fire remained protected. The first light of dawn filtered through the pine branches, casting dappled patterns on the forest floor. Blackwood still slept, his breathing deep and regular, untroubled by conscience or dreams. Naya had survived the night, but her strength was fading rapidly. Her vision blurred, darkening at the edges, her legs trembling uncontrollably. She was so focused on remaining conscious that she almost missed the sound. A soft crunching of pine needles, the careful placement of feet approaching from behind her tree. Not Blackwood's heavy, confident stride, but something more measured, deliberate. A shadow fell across her as someone moved to her side. Through the haze of pain and exhaustion, Naya saw a weathered face framed by steel-gray hair and a salt-and-pepper beard. A face marked by time and hardship, yet achingly familiar. Thomas Hayes had aged considerably in the 5 years since she'd last seen him. Deep lines etched his once smooth face, and a jagged scar ran from his left temple to his jaw. But his eyes, those kind blue eyes, remained unchanged. They widened now in horror at her condition. My God, Naya, he whispered quickly, pulling a hunting knife from his belt. With swift, practiced movements, he cut the ropes, binding her wrists, supporting her weight, as her arms fell limply to her sides. The sudden release sent daggers of pain through her shoulders as blood rushed back into her numbed limbs. Thomas caught her before she could collapse, gently lowering her to the ground, while he sliced through the rope around her neck. "Easy now," he murmured. "You're safe. I've got you." Naya gasped as the pressure on her throat disappeared, drawing a full breath for the first time in hours. Her voice was barely audible, raw from the rope's abrasion. "You came back." Thomas's eyes clouded with emotion. "I'm sorry it took so long." His gaze shifted to her shoulder, where the scar of her removed tattoo was visible through her torn shirt. "Child of Fire," he added in Apache, using the ceremonial title her father had given her. The crack of a pistol shattered the moment. Bark exploded from the tree inches from Thomas's head, as Blackwood, now fully awake, fired from 20 paces away. His face contorted with rage, all pretense of civility abandoned. "Step away from her, Hayes!" he snarled, already aiming for a second shot. "She's mine." Thomas reacted with the speed of a man half his age, shoving Naya behind the tree trunk while drawing his own revolver. He fired back the bullet, kicking up dirt at Blackwood's feet and forcing the colonel to dive for cover behind a boulder. "Run!" Thomas hissed to Naya, pulling her toward a horse tethered nearby. "My cabin is 2 miles north along the creek. Follow the water if we get separated." Another shot rang out. Thomas grunted as the bullet grazed his shoulder, tearing through fabric and flesh. Blood immediately darkened his shirt, but he kept moving, half carrying Naya to the horse. With strength born of desperation, he lifted her onto the saddle before mounting behind her. The horse, spooked by the gunfire, needed little encouragement to bolt. They crashed through the underbrush as more shots echoed behind them, Blackwood's curses fading into the distance. Naya clung to the saddle horn, her body screaming in protest at every jolt and bounce. Thomas's arm encircled her waist, keeping her upright as they galloped through the forest. Wind whipped through her tangled hair, the morning air cool against her face. Despite the danger, despite the pain, the simple act of moving freely after hours of torturous restraint felt like a miracle. Behind them, Blackwood's voice carried through the trees, a promise that chilled Naya's blood. "Run all you want, Hayes. There's nowhere you can hide her that I won't find." Thomas's cabin perched on a rocky outcrop, overlooking a swift-flowing creek, the surrounding pines providing natural concealment from casual observation. Built of hand-hewn logs with a stone chimney, it blended into the landscape as if it had grown there naturally. A small corral stood empty beside it. Thomas had released his other horses before coming to find her. Naya realized. A precaution in case Blackwood tracked them here. By the time they arrived, Naya was barely conscious. Thomas dismounted first, lifting her gently from the saddle and carrying her inside. The cabin's interior was simple but comfortable, one main room with a stone fireplace, a wooden table with 2 chairs, shelves lined with books, and a bed tucked into the corner. A doorway led to what appeared to be a smaller back room. Thomas laid her on the bed, his movements efficient but tender. "Rest here. I need to check the perimeter and tend to the horse." When he returned minutes later, he carried a basin of water, clean cloths, and a wooden box of medical supplies. His own wound had soaked his shirt sleeve with blood, but he ignored it, focusing entirely on Naya. With practiced hands, he cleaned the abrasions on her wrists and neck, applied a soothing salve, and bandaged them carefully. Throughout his ministrations, he spoke little, his concentration absolute. Only when he'd finished did he allow himself to examine his own injury, grimacing as he peeled back the torn fabric. "You're bleeding," Naya said weakly, watching him probe the wound. Thomas attempted a reassuring smile. It's just a graze. I've had worse shaving. He soaked a cloth in water and began cleaning his shoulder, wincing slightly. Let me, Naya insisted, attempting to sit up. You need to rest. And you need both hands to bandage a shoulder wound. She pushed herself upright, fighting a wave of dizziness. I'm not completely helpless. After a moment's hesitation, Thomas handed her the cloth. As he unbuttoned his shirt to expose the injury fully, Naya caught sight of something that made her breath catch, a military tattoo on his chest, partially visible beneath his undershirt. Not just any tattoo, but the distinctive symbol of the Black Eagle Special Unit, the same force that had participated in the Bear Creek Massacre. The symbol was unmistakable, a stylized eagle with outstretched wings clutching arrows in its talons. Naya had seen it on the uniforms of the men who destroyed her village, who killed her family. Her hand froze mid-motion, the cloth dripping water onto the wooden floor. Thomas noticed her expression and followed her gaze. Understanding dawned in his eyes, followed by a profound sadness. Yes, he said quietly. I was there. The confirmation hit Naya like a physical blow. This man who had saved her twice, who had raised her for 5 years alongside his wife Elizabeth, had also been present on the worst day of her life. Had he participated in the slaughter? Had his hands, which now tended her wounds with such care, once carried out Blackwood's orders to destroy her people? Thomas made no move to hide the tattoo or to explain away its significance. Instead, he met her gaze directly, his voice steady but heavy with regret. There are sins I cannot wash away, Naya, but I have tried to atone every day since. The silence that followed was thick with unspoken questions. Naya finished cleaning his wound, her touch clinical, now distant. She helped him bandage it, then retreated to the bed, physically and emotionally exhausted. Thomas respected her need for space, moving to stoke the fire and prepare a simple meal of jerky hardtack and strong coffee. The familiar domestic sounds, the clink of tin cups, the crackle of flames, the soft scrape of the iron pot on the stove created an illusion of normalcy that made the revelation all the more jarring. As night fell, Naya noticed something she'd overlooked upon their arrival. A piano stood against the far wall, its wood polished to a soft glow by years of care. The instrument seemed out of place in this frontier cabin, a piece of civilization transported to the wilderness. Thomas followed her gaze. Elizabeth's, he said simply. I couldn't leave it behind. The mention of her adoptive mother opened another wound. Elizabeth Hayes had been kind and patient, teaching Naya to read and write English, to play piano, to navigate the complexities of the white world while encouraging her to maintain her Apache heritage. Thomas had taught her survival skills, and at Elizabeth's insistence continued speaking Apache with her so she wouldn't lose her native tongue. They had been an unusual family, but a family nonetheless. Until 5 years ago, when Thomas disappeared without explanation, and Elizabeth told Naya only that he needed time away. 2 years later, Elizabeth herself had passed away, leaving Naya alone at 18. Why did you leave us? Naya asked suddenly, the question that had haunted her for 5 years finally finding voice. Thomas sat heavily in a chair by the fire, the lines in his face deepening in the flickering light. I thought you and Elizabeth would be safer without me. He stared into the flames. I was wrong. Before Naya could press, further exhaustion claimed her. She drifted into a fitful sleep, filled with fragments of memory, her father's face as he showed her the sacred map, Elizabeth's gentle hands guiding hers over piano keys, Thomas teaching her to track game through the forest, and always lurking beneath the flames consuming her village. She woke to the soft sound of piano music. The cabin was dark except for moonlight streaming through the window, illuminating Thomas as he sat at the instrument. His fingers moved slowly over the keys, drawing forth a melody of such profound sadness that it brought tears to Naya's eyes. The piece was hauntingly beautiful, but incomplete, ending abruptly, as if the composer had been interrupted mid-thought. Thomas played it through twice, always stopping at the same unresolved phrase, then sat motionless, his hands resting on the silent keys. Naya remained still, instinctively knowing this was a private moment, not meant for witnesses. After several minutes, Thomas closed the piano and returned to his bedroll near the fire. Only then did Naya allow herself to drift back to sleep, the truncated melody echoing in her dreams. Morning brought a new clarity. Her body still ached, but her mind was sharp again, cataloging their situation with ruthless precision. Blackwood would be hunting them. The cabin, while remote, would not remain safe for long. Thomas was already awake, checking his weapons, a Winchester rifle, 2 revolvers, and several knives. He moved with the methodical efficiency of a soldier preparing for battle. "How long before he finds us?" Naya asked, accepting a cup of coffee from him. "A day, maybe 2, if we're lucky." Thomas tested the action on the Winchester. "I need to go into town for supplies, and to see what I can learn about his movements." Alarm flared in Naya. "Is that wise? Necessary?" he corrected. "We can't hide forever. We need information." While Thomas was gone, Naya explored the cabin more thoroughly. In the small back room, she found stacks of journals filled with Thomas's neat handwriting, detailed accounts of military operations, including the Bear Creek Massacre with dates, names, and locations meticulously recorded. Evidence, she realized. Thomas had been building a case against Blackwood for years. On the piano sat a silver frame containing a photograph of Elizabeth and a young girl with blonde curls, Thomas's daughter, who had died in a fire years before he met Naya. Beside the frame lay sheets of music yellowed with age, the edges singed as if they'd been rescued from flames. The handwritten notes matched the melody Thomas had played in the night Elizabeth's unfinished composition. When Thomas returned late in the afternoon, his expression was grim. He carried saddlebags heavy with supplies and a newspaper tucked under his arm. "Blackwood's in town," he said without preamble. "He's gathered a team of 6 men, former soldiers and mercenaries. They're offering a reward for information on our whereabouts." He spread the newspaper on the table. The headline read, "Former Army Colonel Seeks Traitor and Apache Criminal." Below it were sketches of both Thomas and Naya, along with descriptions labeling him as a deserter and her as a thief who had stolen valuable government property. "He's using official channels," Thomas continued, "calling in favors from his military days, making this a legal pursuit rather than a personal vendetta." Aya studied the paper. "They'll believe him. A respected white officer over an Apache girl and a—" She hesitated. "A traitor." Thomas finished with a humorless smile. "Yes, they will." They spent the evening preparing cleaning weapons, packing essential supplies, planning escape routes. Thomas showed Naya a hidden cellar beneath the cabin floor, accessible through a trapdoor under the bearskin rug. It contained more weapons, medical supplies, preserved food, and several canteens of water. "If we're separated," he instructed, "this is your fallback position. Stay here until I return, or until you're absolutely certain it's not safe anymore." As night fell, they sat before the fire, the weight of unspoken questions hanging between them. Finally, Naya broke the silence. "You played Elizabeth's song last night." Thomas looked startled, then nodded. "You were awake." "It's beautiful, but unfinished." "Yeah." His voice softened. "She was composing it for our daughter Sarah. She never completed it before. He trailed off, gazing into the flames. Before the fire. Naya finished for him. Thomas nodded his eyes, reflecting old pain. I wasn't home when it happened. I was on patrol with my unit. By the time I returned, there was nothing left but ashes. His hand clenched around his coffee cup. I joined the army to provide for them, to give them security. Instead, I was absent when they needed me most. The bitter irony hung in the air between them. Thomas had lost his family to fire, then participated in bringing that same destruction to Naya's people. Is that why you were at Bear Creek? She asked, following orders to avoid thinking about your loss. Thomas's gaze remained fixed on the flames. I was following orders, yes, but I never stopped thinking. He looked up, meeting her eyes. When Blackwood gave the command to attack your village, I objected. There was no evidence the Apache there were hostile, no proof they had attacked the supply wagon as claimed. His voice hardened. But Blackwood wanted something in your village, something your father possessed. The map to the sacred fire, Naya said quietly. Thomas nodded. I didn't know what it was then, only that Blackwood was willing to massacre innocent people to get it. He set down his cup and leaned forward. When the attack began, I tried to save who I could. Most of my unit was following Blackwood's orders, but a few of us, we tried to get people out. But you couldn't save them all. There was no accusation in Naya's voice, only a statement of fact. No, Thomas admitted. I found you in that cave hidden away. Your father had already been shot when he tried to confront Blackwood. Your mother... He paused. I'm sorry, Naya. The firelight cast shadows across his face, highlighting the regret etched there. Naya found herself wondering how much of his subsequent kindness to her had been motivated by guilt, how much by genuine care. Perhaps the two were inseparable. Why did you take me in? She asked. You could have left me at an orphanage or with another Apache family. I promised your father, Thomas said simply. As he lay dying, he made me swear to protect you, to keep you safe from Blackwood. He called you Child of Fire, said you were the guardian of something precious. He rubbed his wounded shoulder absently. Elizabeth and I couldn't have more children after Sarah. When I brought you home, Elizabeth saw it as a second chance, a way to heal. And you, what did you see? Thomas was quiet for a long moment. Redemption, he finally said. A chance to save one life amid so much death. To keep my promise. His eyes met hers. I never regretted it, Naya. Not for a moment. The honesty in his voice was undeniable. Whatever else Thomas Hayes might be, he was not a liar. Naya felt the ice around her heart beginning to crack. The man before her was not simply one of her people's killers. He was also her rescuer, her teacher, her second father. The complexity of it defied simple judgment. The night you found me with Blackwood, she said, changing the subject. How did you know where to look? I've been tracking Blackwood for years, gathering evidence of his crimes. Thomas gestured toward the back room where Naya had found the journals. When I heard rumors of an Apache translator being abducted from a trading post, I feared it might be you. Blackwood has been obsessed with finding the sacred fire for a decade. And you, Naya asked, are you not also seeking it? Thomas shook his head. I want it protected, not possessed. Your father believed it was too powerful to belong to any one person or government. He studied her face. You know where it is, don't you? Naya touched her scarred shoulder reflexively. I know half the way. The rest... She hesitated. The rest is with someone I must find. Sarah Wolfclaw, Thomas said, surprising her. At her startled look, he explained, "Your father mentioned her name before he died, said she was the keeper of the song." "Yes," Naya confirmed. "She was our medicine woman. I believe she died in the massacre, but 2 years ago I heard rumors she survived, that she leads a small band of our people in the Mogollon Mountains." Thomas nodded thoughtfully. "It's possible. That region is remote, difficult to access. A good place to hide." He traced a finger along the grain of the wooden table. "If Blackwood learns you're seeking her, he'll follow. It won't be safe." "It's already not safe," Naya pointed out, "and the sacred fire must be protected. My father gave his life for it. I cannot do less." A log collapsed in the fireplace, sending sparks spiraling upward. In the sudden flare of light, Thomas looked older, the weight of his years and choices evident in the set of his shoulders. "We'll leave at dawn," he decided. "Stay off the main trails, head north through Juniper Pass, then east toward the Mogollons. It's longer, but less traveled." As they prepared for sleep, Naya returned to the piano, running her fingers lightly over the keys. The unfinished melody haunted her, a beautiful beginning, with no resolution, much like her life with the Hayes family. "She would have wanted you to play it," Thomas said softly from across the room. "Elizabeth always said music was the one true language, the bridge between all peoples." Naya sat at the instrument, allowing her fingers to find the notes Elizabeth had taught her years ago. She began to play the unfinished piece, her touch hesitant at first, then growing more confident. When she reached the point where the composition ended, she paused, then continued improvising a continuation based on Apache melodies she remembered from childhood. The music filled the cabin, weaving together two worlds: the classical European tradition Elizabeth had loved, and the indigenous rhythms of Naya's ancestors. Thomas listened in silence, his eyes closed, tears streaming unchecked down his weathered face. When the final notes faded, neither spoke for a long while. No words were necessary. In that moment, something had begun to heal between them, a fragile trust rebuilt on the foundation of shared loss and memory. Outside, beyond the cabin's warm circle of light, the white wolf appeared again at the edge of the clearing. It stood watching its breath, forming small clouds in the cold night air, before turning and disappearing into the forest. A sentinel, a guide, a promise. The journey ahead would be dangerous, but they would not walk it alone. They left before sunrise, taking only what they could carry on horseback. Thomas had procured a second mount in town, a sturdy paint mare for Naya. As they rode north, the first golden rays of dawn illuminated the distant mountains, their peaks still capped with late spring snow. The day passed uneventfully, Thomas setting a careful pace that avoided open ground, preferring the cover of forest trails and shallow stream beds where their tracks would be harder to follow. He taught Naya techniques to minimize their trail riding over rocky ground, when possible brushing away footprints, doubling back occasionally to check for pursuit. By nightfall, they had covered nearly 20 miles. They made camp in a small box canyon, its high walls providing natural protection and its single entrance easily defended. As Thomas prepared a small smokeless fire, Naya noticed him wincing when he moved his injured shoulder. "Let me check your wound," she insisted. "It may need cleaning." Thomas submitted to her examination without protest. When she removed the bandage, the skin around the bullet graze was red and warm to the touch, early signs of infection. Naya cleaned it carefully with water from their canteen, then applied a poultice of herbs she had gathered during their journey, her knowledge of traditional Apache medicine complementing Thomas's more conventional first aid. "Where did you learn that?" Thomas asked as she worked. "My mother was training me as a healer before She didn't finish the sentence. Later I studied with an old Apache woman near the trading post. She remembered the old ways. Thomas nodded. Your father said you had the gift, the sight of the healer, he called it. He had great hopes for me, Naya said softly, securing a fresh bandage. I wonder if he would be proud or disappointed in what I became. He would be proud, Thomas said with certainty. You survived. You kept your heritage alive in a world that tried to erase it. And now you're fulfilling the task he entrusted to you. He caught her hand. Never doubt that, Naya. They ate a simple dinner of jerky and hardtack supplemented with wild onions and dandelion greens Naya had gathered. As the night deepened around them, Thomas took the first watch sitting at the canyon entrance with his rifle across his knees, a dark silhouette against the star-strewn sky. Naya curled in her blanket near the dying embers of their fire, her mind drifting between wakefulness and sleep. In that liminal space, memories surfaced, Elizabeth teaching her to bake bread, laughing when Naya got flour all over the kitchen. Thomas showing her how to set snares for rabbits, his patience infinite as she fumbled with the wire. Her father's solemn face as he traced the sacred map onto her skin using traditional bone needles and dyes, explaining each symbol and its meaning. This is our people's greatest treasure and greatest burden, Chief Rising Sun had told her. The sacred fire has protected us for generations, but now it may destroy us if the wrong hands claim it. Remember, daughter fire can warm a home or burn it to ashes. Its purpose depends on the heart of the one who tends it. She woke some time later to Thomas gently shaking her shoulder. Your watch, he whispered. Taking his place at the canyon entrance, Naya watched him settle into his bedroll, noticing how carefully he positioned himself to favor his wounded shoulder. Even in the dim starlight, she could see the lines of pain etched around his mouth. The infection was taking hold. The night stretched long and quiet. A waning moon rose, casting silver light over the landscape. In the distance, coyotes called to each other, their voices echoing across the empty spaces. Naya found comfort in their cries. They were constant, unchanged since her childhood, a reminder that some things endured beyond human conflict and loss. A soft sound behind her made her turn. Thomas was sitting up, his eyes open but unfocused. He muttered something too low for her to catch, then louder, Elizabeth, get out. The house is burning. Naya moved quickly to his side, recognizing the delirium brought on by fever. Thomas, it's me, Naya. You're dreaming. His hand clutched her arm with surprising strength. They killed her, he said, his voice suddenly lucid. Not an accident. They killed her because she knew. Who killed Elizabeth? Naya asked, pressing a cool cloth to his forehead. Blackwood, Thomas said, his eyes clearing momentarily. She found letters, proof of what happened at Bear Creek. She was going to send them to Washington. His voice broke. I told her to wait for me, but she wouldn't listen. Always so damn righteous. Naya felt cold despite the blanket around her shoulders. Blackwood burned your home with Elizabeth inside. Thomas nodded, then winced at the movement. Couldn't prove it. But I know. Always knew. His eyes slid closed again. Fire takes everything in the end, Naya. Everything we love. He lapsed back into restless sleep, leaving Naya with this new, horrifying piece of the puzzle. Blackwood's evil ran deeper than she had imagined. He had not only ordered the massacre of her people, but had also murdered Elizabeth to cover his tracks. The personal vendetta against Thomas made more sense now. Blackwood feared what Thomas knew, what evidence he had collected. Dawn found them both exhausted, Naya from keeping watch through the night, Thomas from fighting the fever that now had him firmly in its grip. His skin burned hot to the touch, and though he insisted he could ride, Naya knew they needed to find shelter and proper medicine soon. "There's a trading post about 10 miles east," Thomas said as they mounted. "Run by a Navajo man named Ben Tallfeather. He'll help us." The journey was slow and difficult. Thomas struggled to remain upright in the saddle, occasionally lapsing into brief periods of unconsciousness, where only his instinctive horsemanship kept him mounted. Naya rode close beside him, ready to grab his reins if he faltered completely. They reached the trading post by mid-afternoon, a sturdy log building with a wooden porch spanning its front, a corral for horses to one side, and a small garden plot behind. A weathered sign above the door read, "Tallfeather's Trading Post and General Store." As they approached, a man emerged from the building, tall and broad-shouldered, with graying black hair pulled back in a traditional Navajo style. He shaded his eyes against the sun, then straightened in recognition. "Hayes," he called, hurrying down the steps. "Thomas Hayes, is that you?" Thomas managed a weak smile. "Hello, Ben. We need help." Ben Tallfeather took in the situation at a glance. Thomas's feverish state, Naya's exhaustion, the signs of hard travel on them both. Without hesitation, he helped Thomas from his horse and supported him into the trading post, nodding for Naya to follow. "Trouble?" he asked simply. "Blackwood." Thomas replied, the single-word explanation enough. Ben's expression darkened. "I see." He helped Thomas to a back room furnished with a simple bed and table. "Rest here. I'll send my wife to tend you both." Within minutes, a Navajo woman appeared with a basin of water, clean linens, and a collection of traditional medicines. She introduced herself as Luyu and set about examining Thomas's wound with practiced efficiency. "Infection," she pronounced. "Bad, but not too deep yet. We caught it in time." She looked at Naya. "You made a poultice, good work. It slowed the poison." Together, they cleaned the wound, thoroughly applied fresh medicine, and wrapped it in clean bandages. Luyu prepared a bitter tea for Thomas to reduce the fever, then left them with bread, dried meat, and a promise to return soon. In the quiet that followed, Naya sank into a chair beside Thomas's bed, the events of the past days catching up with her. She had gone from prisoner to fugitive, from hatred to uncertain reconciliation, all while the shadow of Blackwood loomed ever larger. "Rest," Thomas told her, his voice stronger now that he was horizontal and properly tended. "We're safe for the moment." "Are we?" Naya questioned. "If Blackwood is hunting us, Ben won't betray us," Thomas assured her. "He has no love for Blackwood or the army. They seized half his land for a fort 10 years ago, offering compensation that was a fraction of its worth." He shifted slightly, finding a more comfortable position. "Besides, we won't stay long, just until I can ride without passing out." Naya nodded, too tired to argue. She moved to a pallet Luyu had prepared for her in the corner and was asleep almost before her head touched the pillow. Dreams came swiftly, vivid, disjointed images of fire and blood, of Blackwood's cold eyes, watching her suffer, of Elizabeth Hayes trapped in a burning house, calling for help. That never came. She woke with a start to find the room dark, except for moonlight streaming through the single window. Thomas slept fitfully, occasionally muttering in his dreams. Unable to return to sleep, Naya rose and moved silently to the window. The trading post stood in a small clearing surrounded by pine forest. In the silver moonlight, she could make out the shapes of horses in the corral, the garden with its neat rows of plants, the well with its wooden bucket. A movement at the edge of the trees caught her eye, a flash of white. The wolf had followed them. It stood watching the building, its fur luminous in the moonlight. As Naya observed, it turned its head toward the road leading to the trading post, ears alert, before melting back into the forest. A warning. Naya moved quickly to Thomas's side, shaking him gently. "Thomas, wake up! Someone's coming!" He came awake instantly, soldier's instincts overriding illness. How many? I don't know. The white wolf was watching the road. Thomas didn't question her or dismiss the wolf as imagination. In the years he had lived with her people, he had come to respect Apache beliefs about animal messengers. "Help me up," he said, swinging his legs over the side of the bed. "We need to warn Ben and Luyu." Before they could move, the door opened and Ben entered carrying a lantern. His expression was grim. "Riders coming," he said without preamble. 6 men armed. Blackwood leads them. Thomas cursed under his breath. "How did he find us so quickly?" "The town marshal in Pine Springs telegraphed ahead," Ben explained. "Said Blackwood's offering $50 for information on your whereabouts. That's a month's wages for most folks around here." "We need to leave," Naya said. "Now, before they arrive." Ben shook his head. "Too late for that. They're less than a mile out." He set the lantern on the table. "But I have another way." He led them through the main room of the trading post to what appeared to be a storage area lined with shelves of goods. Moving aside a large barrel, he revealed a trap door in the floor. "Cellar runs beneath the whole building," he explained, lifting the heavy wooden door. "Used it during the Apache Wars to hide friends from both sides who needed sanctuary. There's a tunnel leading out to the creek bed about 100 yards east." Thomas gripped the Navajo man's arm. "This puts you and Luyu at risk." Ben's weathered face broke into a grim smile. "Blackwood seized my best grazing land for his fort. Then his men accidentally burned my winter hay 2 years running. I've been waiting for a chance to repay the favor." He gestured to the open trapdoor. "Go. Take what supplies you need. There are lanterns below." As Naya descended the rough wooden steps, she heard Thomas ask, "What will you tell them? That you were here but left heading west toward California?" Ben replied, "By the time they figure out it's a false trail, you'll be deep in the mountains." The cellar was larger than Naya expected, extending beneath the entire trading post. Wooden support beams held up the ceiling and shelves lined the walls, stocked with preserved foods, ammunition, medical supplies, and other essentials. In one corner, a narrow tunnel entrance was partially concealed behind stacked crates. Luyu appeared moments later carrying saddlebags filled with supplies. "Your horses are already at the tunnel exit," she told them. "Take the south fork of Eagle Creek. It will lead you to the old Apache trail through the mountains." Thomas, moving slowly but steadily, began selecting items from the shelves: ammunition for his rifle and pistols, jerky hardtack coffee matches wrapped in oilcloth to keep them dry. Naya followed his lead, adding medical supplies, a small cooking pot, and a coil of rope. Above them, they heard the distant thunder of approaching hooves. Luyu urged them toward the tunnel. "Go now, quickly." Thomas embraced the woman briefly. "Thank you, old friend." "Repay us by staying alive," Luyu replied, "and by making sure Blackwood finally answers for his crimes." The tunnel was narrow and low-ceilinged, forcing them to move in a crouching position, the lantern Thomas carried casting elongated shadows on the earthen walls. The air was cool and damp, smelling of soil and growing things. After about 100 yards, they reached a wooden ladder leading upward. Thomas went first, pushing aside the covering of branches and earth to emerge in a dry creek bed sheltered by overhanging willows. Naya followed, grateful for the fresh air after the confines of the tunnel. As promised, their horses waited nearby, tethered to a tree and loaded with their original supplies, plus the additions from Ben's cellar. In the distance, they could hear voices from the direction of the trading post. Blackwood and his men had arrived. Thomas extinguished the lantern and helped Naya mount his movements, betraying his continued weakness. Despite the rest and treatment, he was far from recovered. "Can you ride?" she asked quietly. "I'll manage," he replied, pulling himself into the saddle with visible effort. "We need to put distance between us and Blackwood before dawn." They set off along the creek bed, keeping to the shadows, the horses' hooves muffled by the soft sand. The waning moon provided just enough light to navigate by, though they moved slowly to avoid accidents in the uncertain terrain. Behind them, a sudden shout rose from the trading post, followed by angry voices. Ben's deception had been discovered. Thomas urged his horse to a faster pace, and Naya followed suit, abandoning caution for speed. They rode through the night, following Luyu's directions to the South Fork of Eagle Creek, then onto the ancient Apache Trail that wound through the most rugged sections of the Mogollon Mountains. By dawn, they had covered nearly 15 miles of difficult terrain, a pace that would make pursuit challenging even for experienced trackers. As the sun rose over the eastern peaks, they paused in a sheltered valley to rest the horses and eat a hasty breakfast. Thomas, despite his determination, was clearly struggling. The fever had returned, and he moved with the careful deliberation of someone fighting constant pain. "We should stop," Naya suggested. "Find a place to hide until you're stronger." Thomas shook his head. "Blackwood won't give up. Our best chance is to reach Sarah Wolfclaw and your people." He studied the surrounding mountains. "We're still 3 days' hard ride from where the rumors place them in the high country near Silver Creek." 3 days at normal pace," Naya corrected. "At this rate, with your injury—" She didn't finish the thought. Thomas attempted a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Then we'd better keep moving." They continued throughout the day, climbing steadily higher into the mountains. The trail grew increasingly difficult, narrow switchbacks along sheer cliffs, dense forest, where branches hung low enough to sweep a rider from the saddle, swift-running streams that had to be forded carefully to avoid being swept away. By late afternoon, Thomas's condition had deteriorated significantly. He swayed in the saddle, his face gray with exhaustion and pain. When they stopped to water the horses at a small spring, he nearly fell dismounting. Naya made an executive decision. "We camp here tonight. You need rest." This time Thomas didn't argue. While Naya prepared a small, sheltered fire and heated water for coffee, he sat with his back against a tree, his eyes closed. The wound in his shoulder had begun bleeding again, staining the bandage crimson. As Naya changed the dressing, applying more of the herbal poultice Luyu had provided, she found herself studying Thomas's face. In repose, with the lines of pain temporarily smoothed by rest, she could see echoes of the younger man who had rescued her from the burning village a decade ago, the man who had promised her father she would live. Whatever else he might be, soldier participant in the massacre enemy, he had kept that promise. Had raised her, protected her, taught her to survive in both worlds. And now he was risking his life to help her fulfill her sacred duty, to atone for sins he couldn't erase. "Why does Blackwood want the sacred fire so badly?" she asked as she finished bandaging his shoulder. "What does he think it is?" Thomas opened his eyes, regarding her thoughtfully. "He believes it's a new type of mineral, something that burns hotter and longer than coal or oil. Something that could revolutionize industry, transportation, and weapons." He shifted position, wincing. "Your father told me different. He said the sacred fire is life itself, a gift from the Creator that must be protected, not exploited." "Did you believe him?" "I believe there are forces in this world beyond our understanding," Thomas replied carefully. "Things science can't explain that existed before we had words for them." He looked directly at her. "What do you believe it is, Naya?" She was silent for a long moment, considering. I believe it's both, a physical substance and a spiritual power. She touched her scarred shoulder where part of the map had once been tattooed. My father showed me the symbols, taught me their meaning. The sacred fire burns without consuming what it touches. It heals instead of destroys. A fire that heals, Thomas mused. No wonder Blackwood wants it. In his hands it would become a weapon like none other. Which is why we can't let him find it, Naya said firmly. My father died protecting this secret. So did many others. Thomas nodded, his expression solemn. And so might we, before this is over. They sat in companionable silence as darkness fell, each lost in private thoughts. When Thomas finally spoke again, his voice was soft, contemplative. I've been thinking about Elizabeth's song, the way you finished it last night. He gazed into the small fire. She would have loved that. The blending of traditions. Naya smiled at the memory. She always encouraged me to maintain my Apache heritage. Said it was as much a part of me as my hands or heart. She was wiser than I was, Thomas admitted. When I first brought you home, I thought the kindest thing would be to help you forget, to become fully part of our world. His eyes met hers across the fire. Elizabeth knew better. She understood that healing doesn't mean erasing the past, but integrating it into who you become. The fire crackled, sending sparks spiraling upward to join the stars. In that moment, Naya felt a sense of peace she hadn't experienced in years. Despite the danger pursuing them, despite the uncertain future, she knew with sudden clarity that she was exactly where she needed to be. Thomas drifted into sleep shortly after, his breathing labored but steady. Naya kept watch through the night, alert for any sign of pursuit. The white wolf appeared once more, standing at the edge of their camp, its gaze meeting hers across the dying embers of the fire before it vanished into the darkness. Not a harbinger of death, she decided, but a guide, leading them toward whatever destiny awaited in the mountains ahead. Dawn broke clear and cold, the mountain air crisp with the scent of pine. Thomas's fever had broken during the night, and though he was weak, his eyes were clear again. The herbal medicines were working. They set off early, following the ancient trail as it wound ever higher into the Mogollon Range. The landscape grew more dramatic. Towering rock formations, deep canyons cut by rushing streams, forests of ancient pines and aspens whose leaves trembled in the slightest breeze. By midday, they had reached a high plateau overlooking a vast expanse of wilderness. From this vantage point, they could see for miles in every direction. The land spread out below them like a rumpled blanket, ridges and valleys, forests and meadows, all bathed in the clear light of early summer. Beautiful, Thomas murmured, reining in his horse beside Naya's. Sacred, she corrected gently. This is the heart of Apache territory, the land that sustained my people for generations. Thomas nodded in understanding. Your father once told me that to the Apache land isn't something you own. It's something you belong to. Yes, Naya confirmed. Every mountain, every stream, every tree has spirit and purpose. We are merely guests, allowed to partake of its bounty if we show proper respect. They continued their journey, descending from the plateau into a valley where a clear stream provided water and tender grass for the horses. As they rested in the shade of a massive cottonwood, Thomas consulted a tattered map he carried. If the rumors about Sarah Wolfclaw's band are correct, they should be camped near Silver Creek, about a day's ride northeast of here. He traced the route with his finger. The terrain gets rougher, less traveled, more difficult to navigate, but also harder for Blackwood to follow. Naya nodded, studying the map. There's an old sacred site near Silver Creek, a cave system where the ancients left handprints and paintings on the walls. It would be a logical place for Sarah to establish a camp. The caves provide shelter, and the spiritual significance would appeal to her. They set off again, pushing the horses as much as they dared in the difficult terrain. As the day wore on, Thomas grew quieter, conserving his strength. The improvement from the morning had plateaued, leaving him functional but far from recovered. Late in the afternoon, as they navigated a particularly narrow section of trail along a cliff face, the crack of a rifle shot echoed across the canyon. Rock exploded from the cliff inches from Thomas's head, showering them both with fragments. "Ambush!" Thomas shouted, urging his horse forward as more shots rang out. Naya followed, ducking low over her horse's neck as bullets whined past. They rounded a bend in the trail and dismounted quickly, taking cover behind a large boulder. Thomas drew his rifle, scanning the opposite ridge, where puffs of smoke betrayed the shooters' positions. "I count 3, he said grimly. "Blackwood must have split his group to cover more ground." "How did they get ahead of us?" Naya asked, checking that her pistol was loaded. "Someone who knows these mountains better than Ben," Thomas replied. "A local guide, probably Apache or Navajo." The implication was clear. Someone from one of the local tribes had betrayed them, likely for Blackwood's reward money. The thought sent a chill through Naya. If Blackwood could buy such loyalty, who could they trust? Another volley of shots peppered their position, one bullet passing so close to Naya's head that she felt the air displacement. Thomas returned fire, his aim methodical and precise, despite his weakened condition. A cry from across the canyon suggested he had found his mark. "We can't stay here," he said, reloading quickly. "They have the high ground and better cover." Naya surveyed their surroundings. 20 yards ahead, the trail descended steeply into a thickly forested area, better cover, but also a potential trap if their pursuers had positioned men there as well. "The forest is our best chance," she decided. "I know these woods. They might not." Thomas nodded his agreement. "I'll cover our retreat. When I give the signal, make for the trees with the horses." He laid down a barrage of covering fire, forcing the ambushers to keep their heads down. "Now!" he shouted, continuing to fire as Naya led the horses toward the forest edge. She had almost reached the tree line when she heard Thomas cry out in pain. Turning, she saw him stumble, clutching his side, where a fresh blood stain spread across his shirt. He had been hit. Without hesitation, Naya ran back to him, helping him to his feet. "Lean on me," she urged, supporting his weight as they staggered toward the forest. Bullets kicked up dirt around their feet, but somehow they reached the cover of the trees unscathed. The dense underbrush made pursuit on horseback difficult, giving them a temporary advantage. They pushed deeper into the forest, Thomas growing heavier against Naya's shoulder with each step. Finally, in a small clearing sheltered by massive pines, he collapsed. "Go on," he gasped, his face contorted with pain. "Find Sarah. Complete your mission." "Not without you," Naya said firmly, examining his wound. The bullet had grazed his ribs, leaving a deep furrow that bled freely, but didn't appear to have penetrated his chest cavity. Survivable if treated quickly. She tore strips from her shirt to create a pressure bandage, working quickly as the sounds of pursuit grew closer. Their pursuers had abandoned their horses and were following on foot, crashing through the underbrush with little attempt at stealth. "Naya, listen to me," Thomas said urgently, gripping her arm. "If they capture us both, the secret dies with us. The sacred fire falls to Blackwood." His eyes burned with intensity. "You must go on. Find Sarah. Fulfill your father's trust." The conflict tore at Naya's heart, her duty to protect the sacred knowledge versus her loyalty to the man who had twice saved her life. In the end, duty won, but not as Thomas expected. "You're right," she said, helping him to his feet, "which is why you must go on while I lead them away." Before he could protest, she continued, "You know the general location of Sarah's band. I know these forests like the back of my hand. I can lose them, then circle back to find you." She pressed his rifle into his hands. "The horses are just beyond those trees. Take mine, she's faster and fresher. Head northeast toward Silver Creek." Thomas shook his head. "It's too dangerous. It's my choice." Naya cut him off. "My responsibility." She met his gaze squarely. "Ni diwa, Thomas. You will live. This is my promise now." Something in her voice, the echo of his own words from a decade ago, perhaps silenced his objections. With a nod of understanding, he accepted the rifle. "2 days," he said. "If you haven't found me by then, I'll come looking for you." "Fair enough," Naya agreed. She handed him the reins to her horse, which she had quietly retrieved while bandaging his wound. "Now go. And Thomas?" She hesitated, then finished softly, "Thank you for everything." He mounted with difficulty, pain evident in every movement. For a moment he looked down at her, his expression a complex mixture of pride and concern. "Your father would be proud," he said simply, then turned the horse and disappeared into the forest. Naya watched until he was out of sight, then drew her pistol and moved in the opposite direction, deliberately making enough noise to attract their pursuers. The plan worked within minutes. She heard the men changing course, following her trail instead of Thomas's. She led them on a wild chase through the forest, using every trick Thomas had taught her over the years, doubling back, crossing streams to obscure her trail, using rocky ground where she left no footprints. The pursuers were persistent, but not particularly skilled woodsmen. By nightfall, she had lost them completely. Finding shelter in a small cave near a waterfall, Naya allowed herself to rest. Thomas would be miles away by now, hopefully nearing the area where Sarah Wolfclaw and the remnants of their tribe might be found. Tomorrow, she would begin making her way in that direction, careful to avoid leaving signs for Blackwood's men to follow. As darkness settled over the mountains, Naya built a small, smokeless fire for warmth. Outside, an owl called into the night, a sound her people associated with approaching death. A warning, perhaps, or merely a reminder of the stakes they faced. "Shitsili," she whispered to the spirits of her ancestors, "give me strength for what lies ahead." In the dancing flames, she imagined she saw faces her father, her mother, Elizabeth Hayes, and others lost to violence and time. Their legacy lived in her, in the knowledge she carried, in the mission she pursued. The sacred fire must be protected, no matter the cost. This was her inheritance, her duty, her destiny. With this resolve burning in her heart, Naya settled against the cave wall, her pistol close at hand, and allowed herself to drift into watchful sleep. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new dangers, but also, perhaps, the answers she had sought for 10 long years. Morning light filtered through the forest canopy as Naya emerged from the cave, alert for any sign of pursuit. The forest stood quiet around her, disturbed only by the melodic calls of birds and the soft rustling of pine needles in the breeze. She had survived the night, evaded Blackwood's men, and now faced the challenge of finding Thomas and Sarah Wolfclaw in the vastness of the Mogollon Mountains. Naya moved cautiously, keeping to rocky terrain whenever possible to minimize her tracks. She traveled northeast toward Silver Creek, following the same route she had directed Thomas to take the previous day. The journey would be slower without a horse, but stealth was now more important than speed. If Blackwood's men caught her, all would be lost. As she walked, Naya's thoughts turned to Thomas. His revelation about Elizabeth's death had cast Blackwood's evil in an even darker light. The colonel hadn't merely ordered the massacre of her village. He had personally murdered the woman who had become a second mother to Naya, all to protect his secrets and ambitions. How many other lives had been destroyed in his pursuit of the sacred fire? By midday, Naya reached a vantage point that offered a view of the valley ahead. Silver Creek cut through the landscape like a gleaming ribbon bordered by ancient pines and flowering meadows. Beyond it rose the distinctive twin peaks known in Apache tradition as the Grandmother Mountains, said to watch over the sacred caves where the ancestors had left their handprints on stone walls. If Sarah Wolfclaw had established a camp for the surviving Apache, it would likely be near those caves. Protected, hidden, and spiritually significant, a perfect sanctuary for a people nearly erased from their homeland. Naya studied the terrain, carefully planning her route. To reach the caves, she would need to cross Silver Creek, then navigate through several miles of forest and rocky outcroppings. With luck and stealth, she might arrive by nightfall. A flicker of movement in the valley below caught her attention. 3 riders moved along Silver Creek, following its winding course upstream toward the mountains. Even from this distance, Naya recognized the laid rider's posture, Blackwood himself, accompanied by 2 of his men. They were headed in the same direction she was. Cold fear gripped her heart. How had Blackwood determined the location so quickly? Had he captured Thomas? Or worse, had Thomas been more severely injured than she realized, perhaps leaving a blood trail easy to follow? Naya revised her plan immediately. She couldn't take the direct route now, not with Blackwood ahead of her. Instead, she would circle around through the higher elevations, approaching the caves from above rather than from the valley. It would add hours to her journey, but safety demanded caution. As she made her way along the ridgeline, the sun arced across the sky, shadows lengthening as afternoon stretched toward evening. The forest grew denser, older, filled with massive pines whose trunks bore the marks of ancient lightning strikes. In Apache tradition, such trees were considered touched by the Creator, imbued with spiritual power. Naya paused to rest beside one such lightning-scarred giant, leaning against its rough bark, while she ate a small piece of jerky from her pocket. The tree's energy seemed to flow into her, restoring her determination and focus. She closed her eyes briefly, allowing herself a moment of connection with the land that had nurtured her ancestors for countless generations. A twig snapped nearby. Naya's eyes flew open, her hand instantly moving to her pistol. 20 yards away stood a man, young perhaps 25, with the distinctive features and clothing of an Apache, though his skin was lighter, suggesting mixed heritage. He held a rifle, but it wasn't aimed at her. Not yet. "You shouldn't be here," he said in Apache. "These mountains aren't safe anymore." Naya kept her hand near her weapon but didn't draw it. "I'm looking for Sarah Wolfclaw." The man's expression darkened. "Many seek the medicine woman. Few have good intentions." His eyes narrowed. "Who are you?" "I am Naya Redfeather, daughter of Chief Rising Sun of the Bear Creek Band." Recognition flickered in the man's eyes. "The Bear Creek Band was massacred 10 years ago." "Not all of us," Naya replied evenly. "Some survived, like Sarah Wolfclaw." The man studied her for a long moment, uncertainty evident in his stance. Finally, he lowered his rifle slightly. "I am Daniel White River. My father was Apache, my mother white. I serve as scout and hunter for our band." He gestured toward the peaks ahead. "Sarah leads our people now, but why should I take you to her?" Naya touched her scarred shoulder. "Because I carry part of the map to the sacred fire, and because Colonel Blackwood is hunting me just as he hunted my father." Daniel's demeanor changed instantly at the mention of Blackwood. He raised his rifle again, suspicion replacing uncertainty. "How do I know you're not working with the White Colonel, leading him to our camp? If I were his ally, Would I be traveling alone on foot through these mountains? Naya spread her hands to show she carried minimal supplies. I escaped him 2 days ago. He had me tied to a tree, tortured for information about the sacred fire. Daniel's eyes darted to the rope burns still visible on her wrists. After a moment's consideration, he lowered his rifle completely. Blackwood and his men crossed Silver Creek this morning, he said. They're searching the lower caves, but they won't find our camp. We're higher up, where white men rarely venture. He gestured for her to follow. Come, Sarah will want to meet the daughter of Rising Sun. They traveled in silence, Daniel leading the way along game trails so faint Naya would have missed them without a guide. He moved with the quiet confidence of someone born to these mountains, occasionally stopping to listen or survey their surroundings before proceeding. As they climbed higher, the forest began to thin, giving way to rocky terrain dotted with hardy juniper trees and mountain sage. The air grew cooler, tinged with the scent of snow still lingering on the highest peaks, despite the summer warmth in the valleys below. How many survived? Naya asked, as they paused to catch their breath beside a tumbling mountain stream. 38, Daniel replied. Mostly women and children who were gathering plants in the high meadows when the attack came. A few hunters who were in the mountains. He cupped his hands to drink from the stream. Sarah has held us together, kept our traditions alive. But each year more leave to join the reservation or take jobs in white towns. There was an undercurrent of bitterness in his voice, a complicated grief that Naya recognized. She had felt it herself, the pull between honoring tradition and adapting to survive in a changing world. And you, she asked, why do you stay? Daniel straightened, water dripping from his chin. Where else would I go? Among whites I am too Apache. Among traditional Apache I am too white. He gestured toward the peaks ahead. Here with Sarah and our band, I am simply Daniel. That is enough. They continued their ascent as the day waned, the sun sinking toward the western horizon in a blaze of gold and crimson. Just as dusk began to settle over the mountains, they rounded a rocky outcropping to reveal a small plateau nestled between two sheer cliffs. There, sheltered from view on three sides, stood a camp of hide-covered lodges arranged in a traditional circle. Smoke rose from cooking fires carrying the scent of roasting meat and medicinal herbs. Children played near the central fire pit, their laughter echoing off the cliff walls. Women worked at tanning hides or grinding corn, while men repaired weapons and tools. It was a scene from before the coming of white settlers, a pocket of Apache life preserved in these remote mountains, continuing as it had for generations. As Naya and Daniel approached activity in the camp, slowed, all eyes turning toward the newcomers. A murmur spread through the gathering, and people began to move aside, creating a path to the largest lodge at the far side of the circle. From this lodge emerged an elderly woman, her silver hair braided with eagle feathers, her face deeply lined with age and wisdom. Despite her years, she stood straight and tall, her dark eyes sharp and penetrating. She wore a traditional deerskin dress decorated with intricate beadwork, and around her neck hung a medicine pouch adorned with bear claws and hawk feathers. Sarah Wolfclaw, the legendary medicine woman who had once been her father's most trusted advisor. Naya felt a surge of emotion, connection to her past, to her people, to traditions she had feared lost forever. She stepped forward and raised her hand in greeting, palm outward, in the traditional Apache manner. "Degati Elder," she said respectfully. "I am Naya Red Feather, daughter of Chief Rising Sun of the Bear Creek Band." Sarah's weathered face remained impassive, though her eyes studied Naya intently. "Many claim kinship with the dead," she said, her voice strong, despite her age. "Few can prove it." Naya understood the challenge. Without hesitation, she began to sing a sacred song taught to her by her father, one known only to the hereditary leaders of their band. The melody rose and fell in the ancient rhythms of her people, the words invoking the spirits of ancestors and sacred places. As the final notes faded into the gathering darkness, Sarah's stoic expression softened. She stepped forward, placing her hands on Naya's shoulders. "The daughter returns," she said simply, "as was prophesied." The camp erupted in excited whispers. Sarah turned to address the gathering, her voice carrying authority that silenced all other conversation. "This is a night for council. Prepare the sacred fire." She gestured for Naya to follow her into the large lodge. Inside, a small fire burned in a central pit, its light casting dancing shadows on the walls, decorated with painted symbols and hanging bundles of dried herbs. The air was fragrant, with sage and sweet grass, traditional purifying elements. Sarah settled on a woven mat opposite the entrance, motioning for Naya to sit across the fire from her. For a long moment, the elder woman simply observed her as if reading the story of the past 10 years in Naya's face. "You have walked between two worlds," she finally said. "The white man's path and the Apache way." Naya nodded. "After the massacre, I was taken in by a white family. They taught me their language, their customs, while encouraging me to remember my heritage. And now you return carrying danger with you." It wasn't an accusation, merely a statement of fact. "Blackwood hunts you as he hunted your father." "Yes," Naya confirmed. "He seeks the sacred fire. He has half the map, but not the knowledge to use it." She touched her scarred shoulder. "I carried part of the map here, but had to cut it away when I realized Blackwood was closing in. I hid it where he would never look." Sarah nodded thoughtfully. "Your father was wise to divide the knowledge. The map alone is useless without the sacred song that activates the fire's power." Her eyes held Naya's. "I am the keeper of that song." "Then we must protect you," Naya said urgently. "Blackwood is in these mountains with armed men. If he learns you're here—" "He already suspects," Sarah interrupted. "3 days ago, our hunters spotted his men questioning a trapper who sometimes trades with us." She glanced toward the lodge entrance. "Daniel has been tracking their movements, reporting back to me." As if summoned by his name, Daniel entered the lodge, followed by 3 other Apache men. They seated themselves around the fire, nodding respectfully to Sarah, and regarding Naya with varying degrees of curiosity and suspicion. "Tell her what you told me," Sarah instructed Daniel. The young man's expression was grim. "Blackwood has 8 men with him now. They've established a camp near the lower caves and are methodically searching the area." He hesitated, then added, "And they have a prisoner, an older white man wounded. They're questioning him about your whereabouts." Naya's heart lurched. "Thomas Hayes," she whispered. "He was helping me reach you." She turned to Sarah. "We must rescue him. He saved my life after the massacre, raised me as his own daughter." Sarah's eyes narrowed. "Hayes, the lieutenant who was at Bear Creek?" "Yes," Naya acknowledged. "He tried to stop the massacre. When he couldn't, he saved who he could, including me." The elder woman seemed troubled by this information. "I remember him. He argued with Blackwood, tried to prevent the soldiers from firing on the women and children." She studied Naya's face. "But he was still one of them, a soldier following orders." "He spent 10 years gathering evidence against Blackwood," Naya countered, "trying to bring him to justice for what happened at Bear Creek and other crimes." She leaned forward earnestly. "Sarah, without Thomas, I wouldn't be alive. I wouldn't be here to warn you about Blackwood. We can't abandon him." One of the other Apache men spoke up, his voice harsh with anger. Why should we risk our lives for a white soldier? Has he not taken enough from our people? Daniel surprisingly came to Naya's defense. If what she says is true, this man Hayes chose to help one of our own when he could have looked away. That deserves consideration. A heated discussion broke out among the men, with Daniel arguing for a rescue attempt, while the others insisted on prioritizing the band's safety. Sarah listened to all sides without comment, her weathered face revealing nothing of her thoughts. Finally, she raised a hand, instantly silencing the debate. "The daughter of rising sun speaks truth," she declared. "I saw this man Hayes during the massacre. He saved 3 children besides Naya, guiding them to safety, while other soldiers killed without mercy." Her gaze swept the gathered men. "More importantly, if Blackwood breaks him, our location will be revealed. Better to attempt a rescue than wait for the enemy to find us." This pragmatic argument seemed to sway the dissenters. After a brief consultation, a plan began to take shape. Daniel and 2 others would scout Blackwood's camp at dawn, assessing the situation and planning the best approach for a rescue attempt the following night. As the council dispersed, Sarah held Naya back, with a gentle hand on her arm. "There is something else you should know," the elder woman said, her voice low. "The white wolf has been seen near our camp for 3 days now." Naya's pulse quickened. "I've seen it too, following my journey." Sarah nodded, unsurprised. In the old stories, the white wolf appears in times of great change, guiding those who walk between worlds. She studied Naya's face. "It has chosen you, daughter of rising sun. What that means, we shall see." With that cryptic statement, Sarah led Naya to a small lodge where she could rest for the night. Despite her exhaustion, sleep eluded Naya. Her mind raced with worry for Thomas, with the weight of her responsibility to protect the sacred fire, with the complex emotions stirred by reuniting with her people after so long. Outside, the night sky blazed with stars, their cold light illuminating the ancient peaks that had witnessed the rise and fall of civilizations long before Europeans set foot on these shores. Somewhere among those mountains, Thomas was a prisoner suffering at Blackwood's hands. The thought made Naya's heart ache. She slipped outside, seeking solitude to organize her thoughts. The camp was quiet now, most of its inhabitants asleep, except for 2 sentries posted on the rocky outcroppings above. Naya nodded to them as she passed, making her way to the edge of the plateau where she could look out over the moonlit valley below. A soft footfall alerted her to another's presence. Daniel approached, carrying a small bundle wrapped in deerskin. "You should be resting," he said, stopping beside her. "Tomorrow will bring challenges enough." "I could say the same to you," Naya replied. Daniel smiled faintly. "I've never been one for much sleep. My mother called it my Apache blood, always alert even in dreams." He offered her the bundle. "I brought you something. Sarah thought you might want it." Naya unwrapped the deerskin to reveal a small wooden flute, intricately carved with symbols of her father's lineage. Her breath caught in her throat as she recognized it, her father's ceremonial flute, used in sacred rituals and believed to carry the voice of the player directly to the spirit world. "How did you get this?" she asked, running her fingers reverently over the smooth wood. "Sarah salvaged what she could after the massacre," Daniel explained. "Sacred objects, ceremonial items, things that shouldn't fall into white hands. She's kept them safe, waiting for the right time to pass them on." Naya lifted the flute to her lips, but hesitated. "I don't remember all the songs." "Your fingers will remember," Daniel said simply. "The music lives in your blood." Encouraged by his confidence, Naya began to play. The notes came haltingly at first, then with growing assurance as muscle memory awakened. The melody that emerged was one her father had taught her as a child, a song of healing and connection, its haunting tones perfectly suited to the moonlit night. When the final note faded into silence, Daniel spoke quietly. "You have not forgotten as much as you feared." "No," Naya agreed, carefully rewrapping the flute. "But there is much I never learned, much that was lost when my father died." Daniel's expression grew serious. "Is it true what Sarah says? That you carry part of the map to the sacred fire?" Naya studied him, weighing how much to reveal. Despite his help, she didn't yet know if she could fully trust him. "I knew where part of the map was hidden," she said carefully, "but the full knowledge requires both the map and the sacred song that Sarah keeps." "And this sacred fire?" Daniel pressed. "What is it exactly? Blackwood believes it's a mineral deposit, gold or something more valuable." Naya smiled faintly. "The white man always sees the world through the lens of possession. What can be owned, what can be used, what can be sold." She gazed out at the moonlit mountains. "The sacred fire is not a thing to be possessed. It's a force that exists in balance with all living things, a gift that heals rather than destroys, but only in the hands of those pure of heart and intention." Daniel seemed to consider this, his expression thoughtful. "Yet Blackwood hunts it with such determination. He must believe it has great value." "To him it would," Naya acknowledged. "In the wrong hands, even the most sacred gift can become a weapon." She turned to face him directly. "Which is why we must protect it at all costs." Daniel nodded, though something in his eyes suggested inner conflict. Before Naya could pursue this observation, a commotion arose from the far side of the camp, raised voices and the sound of running feet. They hurried back to find several warriors gathered around a newcomer who had apparently just arrived. The man was exhausted and disheveled, his clothing torn and dirty, his face etched with fatigue and urgency. "Thomas!" Naya exclaimed, pushing through the crowd to reach him. Thomas Hayes looked up, relief washing over his haggard features as he recognized her. "Naya," he breathed. "Thank God." He was thinner than when she'd last seen him, his face gaunt with pain and exhaustion. Blood stained his shirt where the bullet had grazed his ribs, and new bruises discolored his face and arms. Despite his condition, he had somehow escaped Blackwood's men and found his way to the Apache camp. Sarah emerged from her lodge, her expression grave as she surveyed the scene. She approached slowly, her eyes fixed on Thomas with an intensity that silenced the murmuring crowd. "Lieutenant Hayes," she said, using his old military title, "you have come a long way to die among enemies." Thomas straightened as much as his injuries allowed. "I don't come as an enemy, Sarah Wolfclaw. I come as a man seeking to right old wrongs." He glanced at Naya. "And to protect those I care for." Sarah studied him for a long moment, then gestured toward her lodge. "Come, your wounds need tending, and your story needs telling." Inside the medicine woman's lodge, Thomas collapsed onto a woven mat, his strength finally giving out now that he had reached relative safety. Sarah expertly examined his injuries, while Naya supported his head, helping him sip water from a clay cup. "Blackwood's hospitality leaves much to be desired," Thomas said with grim humor, wincing as Sarah probed his wounded side. "How did you escape?" Naya asked. Thomas closed his eyes briefly, gathering his thoughts. "They were overconfident. Thought I was too weak to be a threat." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Elizabeth always said my unremarkable appearance was my greatest asset. People underestimate the ordinary." Sarah finished her examination and began preparing a poultice of herbs and pine resin. "The bullet wound is clean, a graze only. But there is fever beginning, and these new injuries need attention." She glanced at Thomas sharply. "You were beaten." Blackwood's preferred method of questioning, Thomas confirmed. He wanted to know where Naya was headed and whether I knew anything about the sacred fire. Naya's heart clenched with guilt. "I shouldn't have left you." "You did exactly right," Thomas countered firmly. "If we'd both been captured, there would be no hope." He grasped her hand. "I've survived worse, Naya, and I learned something valuable while in Blackwood's camp." Sarah paused in her preparations, her interest clearly piqued. "Speak, then." Thomas shifted to a more comfortable position, grimacing at the movement. "Blackwood isn't just seeking the sacred fire for himself. He's working for someone with government connections, someone who wants the fire's power for military applications." "The army?" Naya asked. "Higher," Thomas said grimly. "A senator with investments in railroads, mining, and weapons manufacturing. Someone who stands to profit enormously if the fire's properties can be harnessed." He looked from Naya to Sarah. "Blackwood mentioned a demonstration scheduled for 2 weeks from now. Important people coming to see the miracle mineral in action." Sarah's hands stilled, her expression hardening. "Then his hunt will only grow more desperate as that day approaches." "Yes," Thomas agreed. "And he's close to finding this camp. One of his men is an expert tracker who's been studying the movements of your hunters." He hesitated, then added reluctantly, "And I believe he may have a source inside your band." The accusation hung in the air like smoke. Sarah's eyes narrowed, but she said nothing, continuing her work with the medicinal herbs. Naya glanced toward the lodge entrance, wondering if anyone outside could hear their conversation. "Who?" she asked quietly. Thomas shook his head. "I don't know, but when I was brought to their camp, I overheard Blackwood speaking with someone who was providing information about Apache movements. He called the informant his bridge between worlds." Naya's mind immediately went to Daniel White River with his mixed heritage and his curious questions about the sacred fire. But she kept this suspicion to herself, not wanting to accuse without proof. "We must move the camp," Sarah decided, applying the finished poultice to Thomas's side. "Tonight, under cover of darkness. There are caves higher in the mountains that few know about, sacred places where our ancestors sheltered during the hardest times." She bound Thomas's wounds with strips of clean cloth, her movements efficient despite her age. "You will come with us, Lieutenant Hayes. Your knowledge of Blackwood's plans may prove valuable." Her dark eyes held his. "And it seems the spirits have tied your fate to ours, whether you wished it or not." Thomas accepted this assessment with a nod. "I made a promise to Rising Sun 10 years ago. I intend to keep it." Sarah seemed satisfied with this answer. "Rest now. We leave when the moon sets." Once Thomas had drifted into an exhausted sleep, Sarah beckoned Naya outside. The camp was already in motion, people quietly packing essentials and dismantling lodges. No one questioned Sarah's order to relocate. They had survived this long by remaining mobile, by disappearing whenever danger approached. "The time has come to share knowledge," Sarah said, leading Naya to a secluded spot away from the activity. "Your father entrusted you with part of the map. Now you must learn the song that activates the sacred fire's power." Naya felt a surge of both honor and trepidation. "Am I worthy? I've lived among whites for 10 years. My hands are not clean." Sarah's weathered face softened slightly. "None of our hands are clean, daughter of Rising Sun. We have all compromised to survive." She placed a gnarled hand on Naya's shoulder. "But your heart remains true to your people. That is what matters." The elder began to sing softly an ancient melody, unlike any Naya had heard before. The words were in an older form of Apache, some phrases so archaic that Naya struggled to understand their meaning. The song spoke of fire born from water of healing light that burned without consuming, of a covenant between the Creator and the first people. Sarah sang it through once, then motioned for Naya to join her. Together, they repeated the song, Sarah correcting Naya's pronunciation where needed, emphasizing certain phrases that required precise intonation. "The song is the key," Sarah explained. "The map shows the location, but only the song can awaken the fire's power." They practiced until Naya could sing the entire song flawlessly. By then, the moon was sinking toward the western horizon, and the camp had been nearly dismantled with people standing ready to depart. Thomas, supported by 2 young Apache men, had emerged from Sarah's lodge. Though still weak, he seemed more alert, the medicine having reduced his fever. He carried a small pack containing the few possessions he had managed to keep during his captivity, including Naya, noted the tattered journal in which he had documented Blackwood's crimes. Daniel approached now, dressed for travel, with a rifle slung across his back and a knife at his belt. "The scouts report no movement from Blackwood's camp," he informed Sarah. "They appear to be sleeping, unaware of Hayes's escape." Sarah nodded, apparently satisfied. "Good. We move now, staying high along the ridgeline, where trees provide cover." She gestured to the assembled band members. "No fires until we reach the sacred caves. No talking. Children carried if they cannot walk silently." With practiced efficiency, the small band began their exodus, moving like shadows through the moonlit landscape. Sarah led the way, her knowledge of the terrain evident in every sure-footed step, despite her advanced age. Naya stayed close to Thomas, ready to support him if his strength faltered. Daniel fell into step beside them, his expression unreadable in the dim light. "Your escape was fortunate," he said to Thomas. "Blackwood's men are not known for carelessness." There was a subtle challenge in his tone that made Naya study him more closely. Was he fishing for information? Testing Thomas's story. "Not carelessness," Thomas replied evenly. "Arrogance. Blackwood believes himself superior to everyone, especially those he considers savages or traitors." His eyes met Daniel's directly. "A mistake many white men make when dealing with people they don't understand." Daniel seemed to consider this, then gave a non-committal nod before moving ahead to scout the path. "He suspects me," Thomas murmured to Naya once Daniel was out of earshot. "He may be the informant," Naya whispered back. "He's of mixed heritage, positioned between both worlds, and he asked specific questions about the sacred fire." Thomas frowned. "Perhaps. Or perhaps he's simply cautious. I would be in his position." He adjusted his pack, wincing slightly. "Keep watching him, but don't accuse without proof. We can't afford division right now." The journey through the night was arduous, especially for the elderly and children. The trail grew increasingly difficult as they climbed higher into the mountains, following game paths that sometimes disappeared altogether, forcing them to create their own way through dense underbrush or across rocky slopes. By dawn, they had reached a series of high ridges connected by narrow saddles, the valleys below obscured by morning mist. Sarah called a brief halt, allowing the exhausted band to rest while scouts checked their back trail for signs of pursuit. Naya helped Thomas sit against a boulder, concerned by his labored breathing and the fresh blood staining his bandages. The journey was taking its toll on his already weakened body. "You should have stayed at the camp," she said, offering him water from her canteen. "Let yourself heal before attempting this trek." Thomas shook his head. "And miss all this scenery," he joked weakly, gesturing at the spectacular mountain vista surrounding them. More seriously, he added, "I couldn't risk being recaptured. Not with what I know. Naya started to reply when a commotion arose from the rear of their group. One of the scouts was returning at a run, his face tight with alarm. "Riders," he reported breathlessly to Sarah, "coming fast along our trail, Blackwood and at least 6 men." A ripple of fear passed through the band. Sarah remained calm, quickly assessing the situation. "How far behind?" she asked. 2 miles, maybe less," the scout replied. "They're moving quickly, following our trail easily, despite our precautions." Thomas struggled to his feet, leaning on Naya for support. "Too easily," he said grimly. "Someone must have left markers for them to follow." All eyes turned to Daniel, who had just returned from scouting ahead. He raised his hands defensively. "If you're implying I betrayed our position—" "No one is accusing you, Daniel," Sarah interrupted, though her gaze was sharp. "But someone has guided them to us. That much is clear." She surveyed the group, her decision made quickly. "We divide. The children elderly, and most of the women will continue with Little Hawk and Yellow Bird as guides." She pointed to 2 of her most trusted warriors. "They know the way to the sacred caves. The rest of us will create a diversion, leading Blackwood away from their trail." No one questioned her authority. Quickly, the band reorganized itself according to Sarah's instructions. Thomas insisted on joining the diversion group, despite his injuries, arguing that his knowledge of Blackwood's tactics would be valuable. "Besides," he added with grim humor, "I'm likely to slow down whoever I accompany. Better I delay the decoys than endanger the main group." Sarah accepted this logic with a nod. Yumi, Naya, Daniel, and 5 warriors will head east along the ridge, then double back north through Bear Canyon. She looked at each of them in turn. "Our goal is not to fight, but to lead them away from our people." "Understood." Everyone nodded. The main group departed quickly, disappearing into the forest along the northern slope. The diversion team waited until they were well away, then began moving east deliberately, leaving clear tracks for Blackwood to follow. They traveled for nearly an hour, making good time along the relatively flat ridgeline. Naya kept close to Thomas, worrying about his deteriorating condition. His face had taken on an ashen hue, and sweat beaded on his forehead, despite the cool morning air. "I'm fine," he insisted when she expressed concern. "Just need to catch my second wind." Sarah, who had been watching him carefully, called another brief halt. "We rest for 10 minutes," she announced. "Check weapons and water supplies." While the others took the opportunity to scan their back trail and prepare for what might come, Sarah drew Naya aside. "Your white father cannot continue much longer," she said bluntly. "His spirit is strong, but his body fails." Naya knew she was right. "What can we do? We can't leave him behind." Sarah reached into her medicine pouch and withdrew a small leather packet. "This will give him strength for a few more hours," she explained, handing it to Naya. "Mix it with water, but warn him when it wears off. He will crash hard. His body will demand rest, then regardless of circumstances." Naya accepted the medicine, gratefully returning to Thomas and helping him prepare the mixture. He drank it without question, trusting her judgment. Within minutes, color returned to his face and his breathing eased. He straightened, testing his limbs as though surprised by their renewed strength. "Powerful medicine," he remarked to Sarah, who merely nodded. "It borrows tomorrow's strength to use today," she warned. "Remember that." Their respite was cut short by a distant sound that made everyone tense, the thunder of approaching hooves. Blackwood had found their trail more quickly than anticipated. "Move," Sarah commanded. "Into the trees." We followed the plan Bear Canyon, then north to the high caves. They abandoned the ridge, plunging into the forest that clothed the eastern slope. The terrain quickly grew steeper, forcing them to pick their way carefully down rocky outcroppings and through dense stands of pine and aspen. Behind them, the sounds of pursuit grew louder. Occasional shouts indicated that Blackwood's men were spreading out, attempting to flank them. "They're trying to herd us," Thomas observed grimly. "Drive us toward the canyon where they can trap us." Sarah nodded. "Yes, which means we must reach the canyon first and set our own trap." They increased their pace, moving as quickly as the difficult terrain allowed. Thomas kept up surprisingly well, the medicine giving him a reserve of energy that belied his injuries. Still, Naya could see the toll it was taking, his jaw set in determination, his hand occasionally pressing against his wounded side when he thought no one was looking. By mid-afternoon they reached Bear Canyon, a deep, narrow gash in the mountainside, with sheer rock walls rising hundreds of feet on either side. A small stream ran along its bottom, carving a path through tumbled boulders and stands of ancient pines. "Perfect for an ambush," Daniel muttered as they paused at the canyon's mouth. "Either for us or against us." Sarah pointed to a series of ledges about halfway up the canyon's western wall. "There. We position ourselves above them. When they enter, we reveal ourselves, but do not attack unless provoked." "You want to talk to them?" Naya asked, surprised. "I want them to see our strength," Sarah clarified. "To know that we hold the high ground. Perhaps then Blackwood will reconsider his pursuit." It seemed a slim hope to Naya, given what she knew of Blackwood's ruthless determination. But she understood the wisdom of avoiding direct conflict if possible. Their small group was outnumbered, and except for Thomas, had only limited experience with firearms. They made their way to the ledges Sarah had indicated, finding positions that offered both cover and clear sight lines to the canyon floor below. As they settled in to wait, Naya noticed Thomas's renewed pallor. The medicine was wearing off, just as Sarah had warned. "Hold on a little longer," she encouraged him. "Just until we get past this confrontation." Thomas managed a tired smile. "I've never been one to leave a mission unfinished," he assured her. "I'll be fine." The sound of approaching horses silenced further conversation. From their elevated position they watched as Blackwood and his men entered the canyon cautiously, rifles ready, eyes scanning the rocky walls above them. Blackwood himself rode in the lead, his silver hair gleaming in the afternoon sun, his posture military straight, despite the rough terrain. He wore a dark suit that seemed incongruous in the wilderness setting, and a pistol hung at his hip. His cold eyes missed nothing as he surveyed the canyon. Behind him rode 6 men, a mix of ex-soldiers and frontier toughs, all heavily armed and moving with the wary alertness of experienced hunters. Among them, Naya recognized Marcus Reed, the tracker and bounty hunter who had ambushed them days earlier. When the riders reached a point directly below their position, Sarah stood revealing herself on the ledge. Immediately, rifles swung in her direction, though no one fired. "Colonel Blackwood," she called down, her voice strong and clear despite her age, "you trespass on sacred ground." Blackwood reined in his horse, looking up with an expression of mild surprise that quickly transformed into a calculating smile. "Sarah Wolfclaw," he replied, tipping his hat in mock courtesy. "After all these years, I had heard rumors you survived Bear Creek, but seeing is believing." He gestured expansively. "I mean no disrespect to your sacred places. I merely seek what was stolen from me." Sarah's expression remained impassive. "Nothing was stolen from you, Colonel. One cannot steal what was never yours to possess." As she spoke, the rest of their group revealed themselves on the surrounding ledges, 7 armed figures positioned above the riders, holding the tactical advantage. Blackwood assessed the situation with the cool evaluation of a military strategist. Though his group was technically outnumbered, they were better armed and more experienced in combat. The standoff balanced on a knife's edge. "I seek only the map to the sacred fire," Blackwood said, his tone reasonable, almost friendly. "And the girl, Naya Redfeather. Provide these, and we will trouble you no further." At the mention of her name, Naya stood, making herself visible on the ledge beside Sarah. Blackwood's eyes locked onto her immediately, a predatory gleam lighting his gaze. "Ah, there you are, my dear," he called up. "I've missed our conversations." His smile didn't reach his eyes. "And I see you found your way home, so to speak. How touching." "This ends here, Blackwood," Naya replied, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "The sacred fire is protected. You'll never find it." Blackwood's smile faded slightly. "Never is a very long time, Naya." He adjusted his position in the saddle, glancing at his men. "I prefer to think in more immediate terms. For instance, I have resources, men, and the backing of powerful government interests." He spread his hands. "What do you have? A handful of refugees hiding in the mountains, and a traitor with a bullet wound." At this last comment, Thomas stood, revealing himself beside Naya. Blackwood's expression darkened at the sight of his escaped prisoner. "Hayes," he spat. "Still playing the hero, I see. How did your last attempt at heroism end? With a burning house and a dead wife, as I recall." Thomas's face hardened, but he didn't rise to the bait. "It's over, Edmund. I've documented everything: Bear Creek Elizabeth's murder, your illegal weapons trading. It's all in writing, with copies sent to 3 different newspapers and a federal judge." For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Blackwood's face. "You're bluffing." "Am I?" Thomas countered. "You know me better than that. I've spent 10 years building the case against you. Did you think I wouldn't have contingencies in place?" He gestured to the warriors positioned around them. "Kill us here, and those documents go public immediately. Your precious senator will disavow all knowledge of you, and you'll hang alone." The canyon fell silent as the implications of this threat sank in. Blackwood's men exchanged uneasy glances, clearly not having anticipated this complication. After a tense moment, Blackwood's composure returned. "An interesting gambit, Hayes, but ultimately futile." He nodded to his men, who raised their rifles. "You see, I don't need to kill all of you, just enough to persuade the survivors to cooperate." Before anyone could react, the crack of a rifle shot echoed through the canyon. One of the Apache warriors cried out, clutching his shoulder as he fell back from the edge. Chaos erupted. The Apache returned fire, forcing Blackwood's men to scatter for cover among the boulders below. Sarah pulled Naya down behind a rock outcropping as bullets whined overhead, chipping fragments from the stone. "So much for diplomacy," Thomas muttered, crawling to join them. His face had gone gray with pain, the medicine's effects clearly fading fast. "We need to retreat," Naya insisted. "Find another way out of the canyon." Sarah nodded agreement. "There is a path up the eastern wall that leads to a cave system. If we can reach it, we can lose them in the tunnels." Daniel appeared beside them, ducking as a bullet ricocheted nearby. "I'll cover your withdrawal," he offered. "My rifle has the best range." Sarah studied him for a moment, then nodded. "Very well, but do not linger too long. We'll need your knowledge of the caves." They began moving along the ledge, staying low to avoid presenting targets to the gunmen below. The wounded warrior was helped by his companions, his injury painful but not life-threatening. Behind them, Daniel took up position behind a large boulder, firing methodically to keep Blackwood's men pinned down. His accuracy was impressive, each shot forcing their attackers deeper into cover. The eastern wall of the canyon presented a nearly vertical challenge, but Sarah led them to a narrow crevice partially hidden by scrub pine. Within it, crude handholds had been carved into the rock, an ancient path used by her people for generations. "I'll go first," Sarah said. "Then send the wounded man. The rest of you follow." She fixed Thomas with a stern gaze. "Can you make the climb?" Thomas glanced up at the imposing ascent, then nodded grimly. "I'll manage." Sarah began climbing, her age belied by the sureness of her movements. The wounded warrior followed, assisted from below by his companions. The gunfire continued behind them, keeping Blackwood's men occupied while they made their escape. When it was Thomas's turn, Naya could see how much the exertion cost him. The medicine had worn off completely, leaving him shaking with fatigue and pain. Still, he climbed doggedly, refusing assistance even when his wounded side began bleeding afresh. Naya went last, anxiously watching for Daniel to join them. He continued firing, providing essential cover as they ascended the exposed rock face. Only when everyone else had reached a ledge about 50 feet up did he finally abandon his position and sprint toward the crevice. He had nearly reached it when a shot rang out different from the others, the sharp crack of Blackwood's pistol. Daniel stumbled, clutching his leg, but managed to drag himself into the shelter of the crevice. "Go!" he shouted up to them. "I'll follow." Naya hesitated, torn between continuing upward and helping Daniel. Below, she could see Blackwood's men emerging from cover, moving toward the crevice, now that the covering fire had ceased. "I'm going back for him," she decided, starting to descend. Sarah caught her arm. "No," he made his choice. Her eyes were hard, uncompromising. "The sacred fire must be protected above all else. That is our duty." "I won't leave him to Blackwood," Naya insisted, pulling free. Before she could descend further, a new sound echoed through the canyon, a war cry followed by a barrage of gunfire from the canyon rim. A dozen Apache warriors had appeared above, raining arrows and bullets down on Blackwood's surprised men. "Yellow Bird," Sarah said, relief evident in her voice. "He must have circled back with warriors from the main group when he heard the shooting." The unexpected attack from above threw Blackwood's force into confusion. They retreated toward the canyon entrance, returning fire sporadically, but clearly outmatched by the combined threat from above and the sides. In the chaos, Daniel began climbing, dragging his injured leg behind him. Naya reached down, helping pull him up to their ledge. "Cutting it rather close," she observed, examining his wound quickly. The bullet had passed through the fleshy part of his thigh, painful but not immediately life-threatening. Daniel managed a tight smile despite the pain. "I like to make an entrance." With Yellowbird's warriors providing covering fire from above, they continued their ascent, eventually reaching a narrow opening in the rock face that led into darkness. Sarah produced a small torch, lighting it, to reveal a cave tunnel stretching deep into the mountain. "The sacred caves," she explained. "A labyrinth only our people know how to navigate." She glanced back toward the canyon, where the sounds of gunfire were already diminishing as Blackwood's men retreated. "We should be safe here until we can rejoin the others." They moved deeper into the cave system, the air growing cooler and damper with each step. Thomas walked beside Naya, his arm across her shoulders for support. His breathing labored and uneven. "Just a little farther," she encouraged, though she had no idea how far they actually needed to go. "I'm fine," he insisted automatically, though they both knew it was a lie. The day's exertions had pushed his injured body far beyond its limits. The tunnel widened into a large chamber where ancient pictographs covered the walls. Handprints, animal figures, and abstract symbols rendered in red ochre and black charcoal. Some dated back hundreds, perhaps thousands of years, a visual record of the Apache people's long history in these mountains. "We rest here," Sarah announced. "Yellowbird will find us once Blackwood has been driven away." They settled gratefully onto the smooth stone floor, exhaustion evident in every face. Daniel propped himself against the wall, allowing Sarah to examine and bind his leg wound. The injured warrior from earlier was similarly tended to his friends, helping him find a comfortable position. Thomas collapsed, more than sat, his face alarmingly pale in the torchlight. Naya knelt beside him, helping him drink from her canteen. His skin burned with renewed fever, and his hands trembled uncontrollably. "The medicine has worn off completely," she told Sarah worriedly. "His fever's rising again." The elder woman finished with Daniel, then came to examine Thomas. Her weathered hands moved expertly over his injured side, her expression growing increasingly grave. "The wound festers," she pronounced, "and the exertion has reopened it, allowing the poison to spread." She looked up at Naya, her dark eyes solemn. "Without proper treatment, he will not survive the night." The blunt assessment hit Naya like a physical blow. "What can we do? Surely you have medicines." "For ordinary wounds, yes," Sarah acknowledged. "But this infection runs deep, and his body is weakened from torture and the strain of our journey." She hesitated, then added, "There is one possibility, but it requires something we do not yet possess." "The sacred fire," Naya realized. "It can heal." Sarah nodded. "It is said in the ancient stories that the fire can draw out poison and make the broken whole again. But to reach it—" She glanced meaningfully at the others in the cave, particularly Daniel, who watched them with undisguised interest. Understanding her caution, Naya lowered her voice. "How far are we from it? Can we reach it in time?" "It lies at the heart of this cave system," Sarah whispered, "but to activate its power requires the map and the song used together. And—" she hesitated. "And what?" Naya pressed. Sarah's expression was troubled. "And the activation is not without risk. If the one who calls upon the fire's power is not pure in heart and intention, it will bring judgment rather than healing." Naya looked down at Thomas, who had lapsed into a fitful sleep, his breathing shallow and irregular. She thought of all he had sacrificed to protect her, to atone for the past, to bring Blackwood to justice. "We have to try," she decided. "I owe him that much." Sarah studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "Rest while you can. When Yellowbird arrives, we will make preparations." Naya settled beside Thomas, adjusting her pack to form a pillow for his head. In the flickering torchlight, the ancient images on the cave walls seemed to move, telling stories of a time when spirits and humans walked the earth together, when the boundaries between worlds were thinner. She thought of the white wolf that had followed their journey, of her father's final trust, of the responsibility that now rested on her shoulders. The sacred fire must be protected. But at what cost? Would she sacrifice Thomas's life to keep it from Blackwood's hands? The questions circled in her mind, offering no easy answers. As the torch burned low, casting the cave into deepening shadow, Naya found herself praying not to the Christian God of the Hayes household, but to the spirits of her ancestors, for guidance, for strength, for the wisdom to make impossible choices in the hours to come. Outside, beyond the mountain's stone embrace, the day faded toward evening. Blackwood had been repelled for now, but Naya harbored no illusions that he had given up. He would regroup, perhaps call for reinforcements, and come again more determined than ever to claim the prize he had sought for a decade. The final confrontation was coming. All paths led to the sacred fire, and the choices made there would determine not just their fates, but potentially the future of her people. And Thomas's life hung in the balance, a price Naya was unwilling to pay, if any alternative existed. In the darkness, she reached for his hand, holding it gently as he slept. "Hold on," she whispered. "Just a little longer." Whether he heard or not, his fingers tightened slightly around hers, a promise, a connection, a thread of hope in the gathering darkness. Shadows danced on the ancient cave walls as Yellowbird and his warriors finally arrived their entrance, bringing a renewed sense of urgency to the small group huddled around Thomas Hayes. The Apache scout's face was grim as he reported to Sarah Wolfclaw, his voice low, but carrying clearly in the stone chamber. "Blackwood has retreated to his camp by the lower caves, but he's sending for reinforcements from Fort Whipple. Riders left an hour ago. By tomorrow night, he could have 20 more men with him." Sarah absorbed this news with the stoic calm that had kept her people alive through years of persecution. "Then we must act quickly. The main group, safe in the northern caves," Yellowbird confirmed. No sign they were followed. Naya barely registered the conversation, her attention fixed on Thomas. His condition had deteriorated rapidly in the hours they'd waited. His breathing came in shallow gasps, and his skin burned with a fever that ordinary medicines couldn't break. Occasionally he mumbled in delirium fragments about Elizabeth, about Bear Creek, about promises kept and broken. Sarah knelt beside them, her weathered hand resting briefly on Thomas's forehead. "We cannot wait any longer," she decided. "If the sacred fire is to save him, we must reach it before dawn." "Can he be moved?" Naya asked, dreading the answer. "He must be," Sarah replied simply. "The journey is not far in distance, but the path is difficult. 4 men will carry him on a litter." The preparations happened quickly. A makeshift stretcher was fashioned from blankets and pine branches. Thomas was carefully transferred onto it, barely stirring despite the movement. 4 of the strongest warriors positioned themselves at each corner, lifting him with practiced care. Sarah turned to address the group. "What comes next requires absolute secrecy. The sacred chamber has been protected by our people for generations." Her gaze swept across the gathered faces, lingering briefly on Daniel White River, who sat nursing his wounded leg. "Only those necessary for the ritual will continue, myself, Naya, and those carrying Hayes. The rest will remain here as guardians." Daniel straightened, a flash of something disappointment, anger crossing his features. "I should come. My knowledge of the caves is not needed for this journey," Sarah interrupted firmly. "Your leg requires rest, and we need strong defenders here, in case Blackwood finds this entrance." Though clearly unhappy with the decision, Daniel offered no further argument. Naya felt a twinge of relief. Her suspicions about him hadn't faded, despite his assistance during their escape. The way he'd asked about the sacred fire, his eagerness to accompany them now. Something didn't feel right. With torches lit to illuminate their way, the small procession moved deeper into the mountain. Sarah led her steps, sure, despite her age, navigating a complex network of tunnels and chambers with the confidence of one who had walked these paths many times before. Naya followed directly behind with Thomas's litter bearers, bringing up the rear. The caves grew increasingly narrow, then widened unexpectedly into cathedral-like chambers where stalactites hung like stone fangs from the ceiling. Water dripped somewhere in the darkness, a rhythmic counterpoint to their careful footsteps. The air grew warmer as they descended, heavy with mineral scents and an underlying sweetness Naya couldn't identify. The ancestors say these caves were carved by the tears of the Sky Father mourning for his children below, Sarah said softly as they walked. Each passage represents a different age of our people, times of plenty, times of war, times of great migration. Naya recognized the teaching moment for what it was, Sarah passing down knowledge that might otherwise be lost, ensuring the traditions continued regardless of what happened next. She listened carefully, committing each word to memory as they moved ever deeper into the earth. After what seemed like hours, but might have been less, they reached a sheer rock face that appeared to be a dead end. Sarah approached it without hesitation, running her hand along the stone until she found what she sought. A nearly invisible crevice, just wide enough for a person to slip through sideways. "From here, we go alone," she told the litter-bearers. "Place him here. Naya and I will manage the rest." The men looked uncertain, but none questioned the elder's command. They carefully set Thomas down, then retreated back the way they had come, leaving only their torch for light. Sarah turned to Naya. "Beyond this passage lies the heart of the mountain, the chamber of the sacred fire. Once we enter, there is no turning back. Are you prepared for what may come?" The question carried weight beyond its simple words. Naya knew she was being asked not just about physical readiness, but spiritual preparedness to face whatever power lay within. "I am," she said, firmly, thinking of Thomas and all he had sacrificed. "For his sake, and for the sake of our people." Sarah studied her for a long moment, then nodded in approval. "Help me with him. The passage is narrow but short." Together they maneuvered Thomas's unconscious form through the crevice, Naya going first, and pulling while Sarah guided from behind. The passage opened suddenly into absolute darkness, a void so complete that even their torch seemed diminished by it. As Naya's eyes adjusted, she realized they stood at the edge of a vast underground chamber. The torch illuminated only a small portion, but she could sense the immensity of the space around them. Water reflected the light from below a still black pool that occupied most of the chamber floor. The air was noticeably warmer here, almost humid, and carried that same sweet scent she'd noticed earlier, stronger now. "The sacred pool," Sarah whispered, her voice taking on a reverent quality. "Source of the healing waters, cradle of the eternal flame." They carefully lowered Thomas to the smooth stone floor beside the pool. In the torchlight his face appeared waxen, the fever giving his skin an unnatural sheen. His breathing had become more labored, each inhalation a visible struggle. "What do we do?" Naya asked, fighting to keep the panic from her voice. "He doesn't have much time." Sarah set the torch in a natural holder on the wall, then reached into her medicine pouch. "First, we must complete the map. Where did you hide your portion?" Naya reached beneath her shirt, drawing out a small leather pouch suspended on a cord around her neck. From it, she removed a carefully folded piece of hide, the section that had been tattooed on her shoulder removed and preserved when she realized Blackwood was closing in. "I kept it with me always," she explained, "but made him believe I had hidden it elsewhere." Sarah nodded approvingly, producing her own piece of hide, the portion Blackwood had been carrying. "Taken from one of his men during the canyon battle," she explained, seeing Naya's surprise. Together, they laid the pieces on the stone floor, aligning them carefully. The completed map formed a circular pattern of ancient symbols surrounding a central figure that resembled a flame emerging from water. Around the edges, directional markers and warning symbols created a protective boundary. "Now," Sarah said, her voice soft but intense, "the song must be sung while standing in the sacred pool. The symbols must be traced with water upon the one to be healed." She looked directly at Naya. "You must perform this ritual. You are the daughter of fire chosen by your father to carry this burden." Naya swallowed hard, the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. "Tell me exactly what to do." Sarah's instructions were precise. Naya was to wade into the pool to its center, where a natural stone platform rose just above the water's surface. There she would sing the sacred song while focusing her intention on healing Thomas. Meanwhile, Sarah would remain on shore, tracing the symbolic patterns from the map onto Thomas's body, using water from the pool. Remember, Sarah cautioned, the fire responds to the heart's true intention. If there is doubt, fear, or selfish desire, the power may turn against the caller. Naya removed her boots and outer clothing, leaving only her simple cotton shift. The stone felt cool beneath her feet as she approached the pool's edge. The water lay black and still before her, revealing nothing of its depths. With a deep breath, she stepped in. The water was surprisingly warm, almost body temperature, and seemed to possess an unusual viscosity, thicker than ordinary water, almost like oil. It rose to her knees, then her waist, as she waded carefully toward the center, feeling her way along the stone bottom. The central platform emerged from the darkness, a circular stone about 6 feet in diameter that rose a few inches above the water's surface. Naya climbed onto it, her wet shift clinging to her skin. From this vantage point, she could see the entire chamber dimly illuminated by the distant torch. Sarah knelt beside Thomas at the pool's edge, already beginning to collect water in a small clay bowl she had produced from her medicine pouch. "Begin the song," Sarah called softly. "Let your heart speak to the spirits of this place." Naya closed her eyes, centering herself, as her father had taught her long ago. The sacred song rose to her lips naturally, as if it had always been there waiting to be voiced. The ancient Apache words echoed through the chamber, creating ripples in the air that seemed almost visible in the dim light. As she sang, a curious sensation began to build around her, a vibration in the water, subtle at first, then growing stronger. The sweet scent in the air intensified, and the darkness of the chamber seemed to pulse in rhythm with her voice. Sarah worked methodically on shore, dipping her fingers in the bowl and drawing complex patterns on Thomas's forehead, chest, and palms with the sacred water. She murmured her own prayers as she worked her aged voice, a counterpoint to Naya's clearer tones. The vibration in the pool increased, sending concentric rings outward from Naya's position. The water began to glow faintly, a blue-green luminescence that spread slowly outward, illuminating the chamber more clearly than the torch. Stalactites hung from the distant ceiling like frozen tears, and the walls revealed intricate crystal formations that caught and reflected the growing light. Naya continued singing, allowing the melody to flow through her, neither forcing nor restraining it. The words spoke of renewal, of cleansing fire that burned away poison, but left the spirit untouched, of ancient covenants between the people and the forces of creation. Suddenly, at the exact center of the platform where she stood, a small flame appeared, hovering just above the stone, burning with an impossible blue-white intensity. It neither smoked nor consumed any visible fuel, yet it radiated heat and light that filled the entire chamber. The sacred fire. Naya's voice faltered momentarily in awe, but she forced herself to continue the song. The flame responded to her voice, pulsing and growing, with each phrase casting dancing shadows on the crystal-studded walls. "It answers," Sarah called from the shore. "Focus your intention, Naya. Think only of healing." Naya directed her thoughts toward Thomas, picturing him strong and whole, free from fever and infection, his spirit restored. The blue flame flared brighter, elongating into a column that stretched upward almost to the chamber ceiling. Then, without warning, the flame divided one portion remaining on the platform, while another streaked across the pool toward Thomas's prone form. The fiery ribbon encircled him completely, lifting him several inches off the stone floor and bathing him in azure light. Thomas's body arched as if in pain, a gasp escaping his lips, the first sound he had made in hours. Sarah stepped back, her hands raised in a gesture that was half blessing, half caution. "Do not break the song," she warned Naya. "The fire tests him, now judges whether he is worthy of healing." Within the cocoon of blue flame, Thomas seemed to transform his face, reflecting not just physical pain, but a deeper spiritual anguish. Tears streamed from his closed eyes, evaporating instantly in the heat of the supernatural fire. Naya sang more urgently now, pouring every ounce of gratitude and compassion she felt for this man into the ancient words. The memories flooded through her, Thomas carrying her from the burning village, teaching her to fish in the creek behind their house, defending her against schoolyard taunts, respecting her decision to maintain her Apache heritage, even when it would have been easier to assimilate completely. The blue fire responded, its color deepening to an indigo so intense it was almost painful to look at. Thomas's body relaxed within its embrace, the tension leaving his muscles as the flames worked their mysterious healing. Abruptly, the fire withdrew from him, returning to coalesce with the flame on Naya's platform. The combined fire grew impossibly bright for a heartbeat, then diminished to a small, steady blue flame hovering just above the stone at her feet. In the sudden dimness, Naya could see Thomas sitting up on the shore, looking around in confusion. The fever was gone. The wound in his side had closed completely, leaving only a faint silver scar. Even the bruises from his beatings had faded to barely visible shadows. "Naya!" he called, his voice clear and strong. "What's happening?" Before she could answer, a new sound intruded, voices echoing from the passage they had used to enter the chamber. Urgent, angry voices. Familiar voices. "Blackwood," Thomas said, instantly alert. He rose to his feet with the easy movement of a man in perfect health. "How did he find us?" Sarah's expression darkened. "Betrayal," she said grimly. "There is no other explanation." As if in confirmation of her words, Daniel White River emerged from the passage, followed closely by Colonel Blackwood and 3 of his men. All were armed, their weapons trained on Sarah and Thomas. Daniel's leg wound seemed to trouble him little as he advanced into the chamber, his face a mask of cold determination. "I'm sorry it came to this," he said, though his tone carried little genuine regret. "I tried to make you understand. The sacred fire is too valuable to remain hidden. It belongs to the world, not just to the Apache." "You fool," Sarah spat. "You have no idea what you've done." Blackwood stepped forward, his aristocratic features illuminated by the blue glow still emanating from the pool. His eyes fixed on the small flame hovering near Naya, naked greed evident in his expression. "So this is the famous sacred fire," he remarked, his cultured voice echoing in the vast space. "Smaller than I expected, but clearly unusual." He glanced at Thomas. "And it appears the stories of its healing properties are true. You look remarkably improved, Hayes." Thomas stood protectively in front of Sarah, his posture tense but controlled. "It's over, Blackwood. Whatever you're planning won't work." "On the contrary," Blackwood replied smoothly, "everything is proceeding exactly as planned. Thanks to our friend Mr. White River here, who recognized that progress cannot be halted by outdated superstitions." He gestured toward Naya. "Now, my dear, why don't you bring that fascinating little flame over here so we can discuss its future properly?" Naya remained on the stone platform, the sacred song still flowing through her mind, though she no longer sang aloud. The blue flame at her feet pulsed gently, as if responding to her thoughts. "The fire isn't something you can possess, Blackwood," she called across the water. "It isn't a weapon or a commodity. It's alive in its way. Conscious." Blackwood's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Poetic notions, but hardly relevant. Daniel has already explained how it works. The mineral compounds in this pool activated by specific sound frequencies." He gestured dismissively. Rare and valuable, certainly, but ultimately a natural phenomenon that can be studied, replicated, and harnessed. Daniel stepped closer to the pool's edge. Naya, please. Think of what this discovery could mean. New energy sources, advanced medicine, an end to dependence on coal and oil. His voice took on a pleading quality. Your people could benefit too proper recognition, compensation, a place in history. My people need their sacred heritage protected, not exploited. Naya replied, anger rising within her. The flame at her feet flared higher in response to her emotion. You've betrayed not just me and Sarah, but all Apache. For what money recognition from men like Blackwood, who see you as nothing but a useful tool? Daniel's expression hardened. You're blinded by the past, clinging to traditions while our people languish on reservations. He gestured toward Blackwood. The colonel understands the value of cooperation. His backers in Washington have promised fair treatment for any Apache who assist with developing the fire's potential. And you believed him? Thomas interjected incredulously. The man who ordered the Bear Creek massacre, who murdered my wife when she discovered his crimes. He shook his head in disgust. You've made a deal with the devil's son. Blackwood's patience visibly thinned. He nodded to his men, who cocked their rifles. Enough debate. Naya, you have two choices. Bring the fire to shore and teach us how to activate it, or watch your friends die one by one, starting with the old woman. A rifle barrel pressed against Sarah's temple. The elder didn't flinch, her dark eyes remaining fixed on Naya with a message that needed no words. Protect the sacred trust, regardless of the cost. Time seemed to slow as Naya considered her options. The sacred fire continued to pulse at her feet, its rhythm somehow synchronizing with her heartbeat. She could feel its energy flowing through her, connecting her to this ancient place, and to countless generations of her ancestors who had protected its secret. A memory surfaced her father showing her the map that would eventually be tattooed on her shoulder. The sacred fire judges the heart, he had told her. It heals the worthy and consumes the corrupt. Remember this always, my daughter. In that moment, clarity came. Naya straightened, decision made. I'll bring it to you, she called, her voice steady. But only you can approach Blackwood. Your men stay where they are. Suspicion flickered across the colonel's face, but greed won out. Lower your weapons, he instructed his men, but keep them ready. He removed his suit jacket and rolled up his sleeves, preparing to wade into the pool. Daniel moved as if to join him, but Blackwood waved him back. I'll handle this myself. As Blackwood stepped into the water, Naya began humming softly, not the full sacred song, but enough to maintain her connection with the fire. It responded, growing slightly taller, but remaining at her feet. That's it, Blackwood encouraged as he waded deeper. Keep it active until I arrive. Across the chamber, Thomas caught Naya's eye. Something in her expression must have communicated her intent, for he subtly shifted his position, preparing to act when the moment came. Blackwood reached the central platform, water dripping from his clothing as he climbed up to stand before Naya. His eyes never left the blue flame, his expression almost reverent in its intensity. Magnificent, he murmured. The applications are endless. Weapons that never cool, engines that never stop, medical treatments beyond imagination. He looked up at Naya, his mask of civility slipping to reveal the ruthless ambition beneath. Show me how to control it. Naya met his gaze steadily. The fire responds to intention, Blackwood. It reflects what's in your heart. She gestured toward the flame. Touch it. Show it what you desire. Eagerness overcame caution. Blackwood reached toward the flame, his fingers trembling slightly with anticipation. "Will it burn?" "Only what deserves burning," Naya replied softly. Blackwood's fingertips made contact with the blue fire. For a moment, nothing happened. The flame simply parted around his hand like water. His face lit with triumph. Then everything changed. The flame surged upward, explosively engulfing Blackwood's entire arm in blue fire. He screamed not in physical pain, but in something deeper, the agony of a soul exposed to its own corruption. The fire spread rapidly, covering his entire body in a cocoon of brilliant azure light. Within this fiery embrace, Blackwood's form became translucent, revealing not his physical being, but the spiritual reality beneath. Dark shadows writhed within him, the accumulated weight of decades of cruelty, ambition, and callous disregard for human life. More terrifying, still images began to project from the flame onto the crystal-studded walls of the chamber. Blackwood's memories, his crimes made visible for all to witness. The Bear Creek Massacre played out in horrific detail. Elizabeth Hayes trapped in a burning house while Blackwood watched from outside, preventing any rescue. Countless smaller cruelties, bribes, taken witnesses, threatened lives, destroyed in pursuit of power and wealth. No, Blackwood's voice was barely recognizable, distorted by the supernatural flame. "Make it stop. I command you." "The fire doesn't obey commands," Naya said quietly. "It reveals truth. That's its power." Blackwood, not as a weapon, but as a mirror to the soul. On the shore, Blackwood's men watched in horror as their leader writhed within the blue inferno. One dropped his rifle and fled back through the passage. Another raised his weapon, aiming at Naya, but Thomas moved with unexpected speed, tackling him before he could fire. Sarah seized the moment, producing a hidden knife, and disarming the man who had been guarding her. Daniel stood frozen, his expression shifting from shock to fear as he witnessed the fire's judgment. The blue flames around Blackwood intensified, lifting him from the platform and suspending him above the pool. His screams echoed through the chamber as more memories were forcibly extracted and displayed. The senator who had backed his search for the fire, their plans to weaponize it, the tests they had already conducted on prisoners at a remote facility. Then, abruptly, the fire released him. Blackwood fell into the pool with a splash, surfacing moments later, gasping and clutching at the water, as if drowning in air. His hair had turned completely white, and his face bore new lines etched by spiritual rather than physical pain. The blue flame returned to Naya's feet, diminished but still present. Blackwood dragged himself toward the shore, all pretense of dignity abandoned. When he finally collapsed on the stone floor, he curled into a fetal position, sobbing uncontrollably. What did it do to me?" he managed between breaths. Sarah approached him cautiously. "The fire showed you your true self, Colonel. It burned away the lies you tell yourself." Her voice held no triumph, only a somber recognition of justice served. Some would call it divine judgment, others merely the weight of your own conscience finally felt in full. Thomas and the others had subdued the remaining guards. Daniel hung back, clearly uncertain of his standing now that Blackwood's plans had literally gone up in flames. Naya waded back to shore, the blue flame following her across the water's surface like a faithful companion. When she reached dry land, it hovered between her and the still trembling Blackwood. "The fire has judged you but not destroyed you," she told him quietly. "That's more mercy than you showed my people." Blackwood looked up, his eyes haunted by visions only he could still see. "I can't live with it," he whispered. "The weight, the faces, everything I've done. You will live with it, Thomas said firmly, standing over his former commander. You'll face earthly justice, too. For Bear Creek. For Elizabeth. For all of it. He produced a pair of handcuffs from one of the subdued guards and secured Blackwood's wrists. The once proud colonel offered no resistance, seeming smaller, somehow diminished beyond his physical form. Daniel stepped forward hesitantly. I didn't know, he said, his voice unsteady. About Bear Creek, about his wife. I thought it was just about progress, about helping our people find a place in the changing world. Intentions pave the road to destruction as surely as actions, Sarah replied severely. You betrayed your heritage for empty promises. What happens to him? Naya asked, nodding toward Daniel. Sarah considered the young man, her expression stern but not unmerciful. He will return to the band, but as an outcast, until he earns back trust. 1 year of silence, speaking to no one, participating in all duties, but enjoying no privileges. She fixed Daniel with a penetrating stare. If you accept this punishment willingly, there may eventually be forgiveness. Daniel bowed his head, accepting the judgment without protest. With the immediate threat, neutralized attention returned to the sacred fire, still hovering near Naya. Its blue light illuminated the chamber, softly revealing details previously hidden in darkness, including a series of ancient paintings high on the walls depicting figures dancing around a similar flame. What happens now? Thomas asked quietly. To the fire. Sarah approached, studying the flame thoughtfully. It has awakened fully for the first time in generations. The ancestors say that once awakened, it cannot simply be put back to sleep. She looked at Naya. It has chosen you, daughter of fire. It will follow where you lead. The enormity of this responsibility settled on Naya's shoulders. I can't take it from here, she protested. This is its home, its sacred place. Its home is with the people, Sarah corrected gently. It manifested here because this was where our ancestors could safely commune with it. But the fire itself exists beyond physical location. She gestured toward the blue flame. It has bonded with you, recognized your spirit as worthy. That is rare, and not to be refused lightly. Thomas moved to stand beside Naya, his expression thoughtful. What would this mean, practically speaking? Could she live a normal life with... He gestured at the hovering flame. This, Sarah's weathered face creased in a rare smile. The fire can be dormant when not needed. It will respond to her call through the sacred song and return to dormancy at her command. She placed a gnarled hand on Naya's arm. But you must learn to control it fully to understand its nature and limitations. That will take time and guidance. Your guidance, Naya said, understanding dawning. You want me to stay with the band. For a time, Sarah acknowledged. Until you master what has been given to you. She glanced at Thomas. Your white father would be welcome to stay as well. The fire has judged him worthy of healing. That carries weight among our people. Thomas looked surprised, but genuinely touched by the offer. I'm honored, he said sincerely, but first I have obligations to fulfill. He nodded toward Blackwood. He needs to face justice in the white man's courts. The evidence I've gathered, combined with what we all witnessed here, should be enough to ensure he never threatens your people again. The practical considerations of leaving the cave with prisoners in tow occupied the next hour. Blackwood's remaining men were bound securely, and Thomas organized a party to escort them back to civilization, where telegrams could be sent to both military authorities and the federal judge, who held copies of Thomas's evidence. Throughout these preparations, Naya remained somewhat apart, communing silently with the sacred fire that continued to hover near her. Under Sarah's guidance, she practiced calling it to activity, and returning it to dormancy, a small blue spark that nestled against her heart, invisible but present. As they prepared to leave the sacred chamber, Sarah drew Naya aside. "There is one more thing you should know," the elder said, her voice low. "The fire's greatest power is not healing or revelation, though these are significant." "What is it then?" Naya asked. Sarah's eyes held ancient wisdom. "Renewal, rebirth. The fire can cleanse not just individuals, but lands, relationships, spirits." She gestured expansively. "Your father foresaw a time when our people would need this power not to return to the past, but to forge a new future that honors what was while embracing what could be." The weight of this knowledge settled over Naya. Not just a weapon to be protected from misuse, but a positive force for restoration. A sacred trust even more profound than she had imagined. "I'll learn," she promised. "Everything you can teach me." Sarah nodded, satisfied. "The learning will take years, but you have a strong foundation. Your feet walk in two worlds, Naya Redfeather. That perspective will serve you well as keeper of the fire." The journey back through the cave system was accomplished without incident, though moving the prisoners required careful management. By the time they emerged into daylight, the sun was setting, painting the western sky in shades of gold and crimson that gradually deepened to purple. The main Apache band had been alerted to their success and had begun breaking camp, preparing to return to their previous location now that the immediate threat had passed. Children ran playing between half-dismantled lodges, while women packed belongings and men secured horses for the journey. Thomas and Naya stood slightly apart from the activity, watching the sunset from a rocky outcropping above the camp. After the intensity of recent events, the simple beauty of the moment felt almost surreal. "So," Thomas said eventually, "a guardian of sacred fire. It's quite a career change from translator at a trading post." Naya smiled at his attempt at humor. "Not what I expected when I set out to find Sarah, certainly." She glanced at him. "What about you? What will you do after Blackwood faces justice?" Thomas considered the question, his gaze on the distant horizon. The sacred fire had healed more than his physical wounds. There was a peace in his expression that Naya had never seen before, as if some long-carried burden had finally been set down. "I've spent 10 years focused on bringing Blackwood to account," he said thoughtfully. "Haven't given much thought to what comes after." He turned to face her. "But Sarah's offer is appealing. I've always felt more at home in these mountains than in any city." "You'd stay with the band?" Naya asked, surprised and pleased. "If they'll have me, an old white soldier might have some useful skills to contribute." His expression grew more serious. "And I've come to realize something important, Naya. Home isn't a place. It's people. For me, that means you." The simple declaration touched Naya deeply. After all they had been through, the revelations about Bear Creek, his role in the massacre, her initial distrust, they had arrived at a place of profound connection that transcended blood ties or cultural differences. "I'd like that," she said softly. "There's still so much I can learn from you, and Sarah seems to think you have a place here." Thomas smiled. "Sarah is a wise woman, terrifying but wise." They lapsed into companionable silence, watching as the first stars appeared in the deepening twilight. Below in the camp, someone began playing a drum, its steady rhythm echoing against the canyon walls. Soon other instruments joined, rattles, flutes, the distinctive sound of Apache violin strings. "They're celebrating," Thomas observed. "Not just victory," Naya explained. "Renewal. The sacred fire's return is seen as a sign of rebirth for our people." As if responding to her words, she felt a warm pulse near her heart, the dormant fire acknowledging its role. The sensation was no longer alien, but comforting, like the presence of a faithful guardian. Sarah appeared from the gathering below, making her way carefully up the rocky path to join them. Despite the day's exertions, she moved with surprising energy, her face animated by the sounds of celebration. "They sing the old songs," she said approvingly. "Songs not heard in many seasons." She gestured for them to follow. "Come, your places are by the council fire tonight." As they descended toward the camp, Thomas placed a hand on Naya's shoulder. "Whatever comes next," he said quietly, "I'm proud of you, Naya. Your father would be too." The simple words carried immense weight. Naya thought of Chief Rising Sun, of his final trust, of the long journey that had led her here. She thought of Elizabeth Hayes, whose kindness had helped a traumatized Apache girl find her way in a new world. She thought of Sarah Wolfclaw, keeper of ancient wisdom, who now offered to share that knowledge with her. And she thought of Thomas, the complex, honorable man who had rescued her twice, who had struggled with his own complicity in tragedy, who had ultimately risked everything to help her fulfill her sacred duty. As they joined the circle around the fire, Naya felt a sense of completion, not an ending but a beginning. The sacred fire pulsed gently within her, a reminder of both responsibility and possibility. The future stretched before her, uncertain in its details but clear in its purpose. The daughter of two worlds, guardian of an ancient power bridge between past and future. It was not the life she had expected, but it was the one she now embraced with an open heart. 3 months later, Thomas returned to the Apache camp after testifying at Blackwood's trial in Santa Fe. He rode in just before sunset, his horse kicking up dust that glowed golden in the late afternoon light. Naya spotted him from the edge of the camp, where she had been gathering medicinal herbs with Sarah, and ran to meet him, joy evident in her face. "It's done," Thomas said as he dismounted, accepting her embrace with a smile. 20 years in federal prison for the Bear Creek Massacre. Additional charges pending for Elizabeth's murder once they finish the investigation. Sarah joined them at a more dignified pace. And the senator, the one who sought the fire's power. Thomas's expression grew more serious. Implicated by Blackwood's testimony, but claiming ignorance of the details. There will be a separate investigation, though these things move slowly when powerful men are involved. "Politics," Sarah said dismissively. "Some things never change." She gestured toward the camp. "Come, you are tired, hungry. We will talk more after you have rested." That evening, around the council fire, Thomas shared the details of the trial with the gathered band members. Blackwood, he reported, was a broken man. The fire's judgment had left deeper scars than any physical punishment could inflict. Throughout the proceedings, he had been docile, admitting his crimes without hesitation or excuse. "The fire showed him his true self," Naya observed. "There's no hiding from that." "No," Thomas agreed. "Though I almost felt sorry for him in the end." He stared into the flames. "Almost." Later, after most of the band had retired to their lodges, Thomas, Naya, and Sarah remained by the fire. Thomas produced a package wrapped in oilskin from his saddlebag. "I brought something back from Santa Fe," he said, carefully unwrapping the object. "I thought it belonged here with you." It was Elizabeth's unfinished musical composition, the pages now properly preserved, and bound the fire damage at the edges, serving as a reminder of their shared history. "I had copies made," Thomas explained. "The originals should stay with Naya, I think. Elizabeth would have wanted that." Naya accepted the gift reverently, running her fingers over the handwritten notes. "I've been thinking about the melody," she said, "about how it might end." Sarah nodded encouragingly. "Music, like fire, can bridge worlds. Perhaps this composition serves a purpose beyond what its creator imagined. 3 days later, under a full moon, Naya performed the completed piece on a small wooden flute, crafted by one of the band's elders. The melody began with Elizabeth's classical European phrases, then transitioned seamlessly into traditional Apache themes before combining both influences in a harmonious conclusion that belonged fully to neither tradition but honored both. As the final notes faded into the night, Thomas wiped tears from his eyes. "She would have loved that," he said simply. Naya felt the sacred fire stir within her, responding to the music's emotional resonance. Under Sarah's tutelage, she had learned to interpret its different movements. This was approval, recognition of harmony restored. "Two traditions, one heart," Sarah said approvingly. "This is the way forward, I think. Not forgetting who we were, but not refusing to become what we might be." The wisdom of her words settled over them like a blessing. Thomas reached out, taking Naya's hand in his own, the former soldier and the Apache healer connected by tragedy, but now united by something stronger than shared pain. "Whatever comes next," he said, echoing his words from months earlier, "we face it together." As family, Naya agreed, feeling the sacred fire pulse in affirmation. As keepers of the flame. Above them, stars wheeled in their ancient patterns unchanged by human concerns, yet witnessing the small, significant moments that shaped individual lives and collective destinies. Somewhere in the surrounding forest, a white wolf howled a single pure note that seemed to carry both farewell and promise. The fire at the center of the camp burned low, its ordinary flames a humble echo of the sacred power that now resided dormant but ever present within the heart of a young woman who had found her purpose at the intersection of worlds. A woman who had journeyed through loss and betrayal to discover a truth larger than revenge or justice alone. That sometimes the most sacred fire of all is the one that burns in human connections, in forgiveness offered in trust, rebuilt in bridges spanning the chasms that divide us from one another. In the mountains of Arizona, beneath a star-filled sky, this ancient and ever-new understanding took root once more. The story of the sacred fire and its guardians would continue evolving with each generation, yet remaining true to its essential nature. A flame that heals rather than destroys when tended by hearts worthy of its trust. The end.